Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. I work at a museum. There's a pedestal that's always empty, and its plaque says, "Do not look when occupied." It's no secret that, when in need of money, someone is willing to go to extreme lengths. I'm not morally corrupt enough to murder, but I was still desperate to do things close to that. The divorce had been hard on me, and I wanted to get out of that house and just live on my own. For that, you need green, and my job wasn't paying enough for me to just wander off and change my address so quickly. In retrospective, maybe it wasn't so wise to look for a job on the dark web. Those pay the most, though, and I didn't want to spend my time caring for some kid or old lady, only to get paid $10 an hour. I started browsing whatever forum I could find, and filter my search so that I wouldn't have to kill anyone or sleep with anyone. After a while, I came across offerings of package deliveries and such things. Deliver this to this address. Show up to this house, etc., etc. It was all right by me, but I didn't have a car, and I couldn't just walk for miles with suspicious boxes in hand. I finally came across this listing. Museum worker needed. $100/hour. Temporary exhibition hosted somewhere in the suburbs. I checked the address on Google Maps and found some abandoned warehouse at the edge of town. I'd driven by it a few times, back when the family car was also my car. I thought I could give it a try. Maybe with some contemporary art stuff, some voodoo statues, or cursed items. I didn't believe in any of that, so it really wasn't a problem to me. It said I had to be there during the week, from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Sundays were off. The exhibition would run for around 3 months. I quickly added up some numbers. $100 an hour, for 6 hours a day, for 6 days a week, for 3 months. That would certainly cover for a deposit and some second-hand car. I figured that would be enough to help me get by. I ran through the possibilities of weird implications this ad might have. Maybe the museum was a front for human trafficking, drug dealing, or other illegal things. I don't even know why I said maybe. That was surely the case. I just had to be careful and not look into things too much. Or maybe the exhibition was hosted by some eccentric millionaire who wanted to display his dubious antiques. Either way, $100 is $100. I replied and got an instant response. Next thing I know, I was hired. With the little money that I had, I bought a bike and some headphones to help pass the time. I arrived at the warehouse one Monday at 10 a.m., eager to get the job started and get my money. I wasn't expecting it to be so empty. The warehouse was huge on the inside, but the items displayed were very few. Mostly paintings covering the walls and some wooden statues, extremely tall. They almost reached the ceiling of the warehouse, and I couldn't really see their faces. All of them were sort of bent down, almost as if they were giants watching so as not to step on us. Some notebooks were on display, too. Most of them had drawings or scribbles. They weren't extraordinary. I really couldn't tell what I was looking at. I saw some unknown surgical equipment. It looked almost medieval. Next to it, a pair of ordinary scissors. I thought at first that it was ironic or just a piece of art, but the washed-out lady that had led me in there told me that those particular scissors were authentic and extremely important. I couldn't really tell what age the lady was. She was Asian, her skin clear and luminous. Based solely off that, I could have guessed she was in her teens, but her eyes moved around a lot and had a certain darkness that you only gain with age. Contrasting to her face, her hands were wrinkled and stained. Her hair fell in long threads on her back and was tangled toward the end. It looked unwashed. The most interesting part consisted in the last 3 items, displayed on the opposing wall to the entrance. If I sat at my desk near the entrance, the wall was almost invisible, hidden in shadows. I didn't understand why the lights were so dim. The lady explained that it contributed to the atmosphere of the exhibition. One of the items was a low, round wooden table. The plaque in front of it read The Hunger. The table was chewed and clawed at the edges. I think it used to be square, but the wood had been bitten off and chewed to the point where the corners were rounded. The teeth marks on the table were human. I figured it must have been some art piece. The other item was a pair of shoes. The plaque read the shoes that walked home. They were old, made of leather, and worn out in impossible places, as if whoever had worn them had walked in circles continuously. The last item was an empty pedestal. Its plaque read, "Painter, do not look when occupied." I stared at it a while. Such an interesting concept. I mumbled, noticing the lady's unblinking gaze on me. "Yes," she replied. "Don't look when it's occupied, though." "How would I know, Dash?" "You'll see. It's a really easy job. You don't have a lot of duties, and you earn so much money by basically doing nothing. You must understand we value your discretion and lack of curiosity the most." "Yes, thanks," I responded quickly. Suddenly, I realized I didn't really want her to leave. That didn't stop her from traversing the warehouse and shutting the door behind her without any other formalities. I was left alone with the art. My job was to sit at the desk and greet visitors, sell them tickets. I noticed that the stack of tickets was relatively small. They didn't really expect visitors. As I imagined, the warehouse was at the edge of town, and nothing really promoted this exhibition. No one was going to come. I decided I would put on some music and study the paintings. I got up and moved in front of the first, titled My Mother. It showed a beautiful sea landscape, the crystal waves melting into the bright shore. It was a type of scenery you'd find before a storm, so bright and yet ominous, as if it knew what it awaited. I couldn't find any trace of a woman, though. Right when I was about to move to the next painting, my neck tensed up. It's impossible to describe it. The sudden alarming urge to run, the panic that builds up in your chest. I was afraid to turn around, and yet I hated having my back turned to the room. I took a deep breath. "I'll count to 3. 1, 2, 3. I didn't turn around. I kept locking eyes with my mother, afraid to act on the impulse of running back to my desk. After torturous moments where my heart was threatening to jump out my chest, I did a swift turn and then plunged back to my desk. "Phew," I said out loud. "This place is creepy as fuck." "Why?" "Because, I don't know, it's just fucking odd. I wouldn't pay money to come here." My throat was so dry it was itching. In the cold air, drops of sweat began gathering on my forehead. My eyes darted to various points of the room, to the paintings, to the statues, to its corners. Who had I spoken to? Who even was that? I stared at the closed entrance door. Who was that? I got no answer. "Fuck off. Just answer me. I heard you loud and clear. I know that someone is in here. You have to." I began hopelessly. "You have to buy a ticket to get in." I heard a clatter in the back of the warehouse. The hunger, the shoes that walked home, the painter. Did the pedestal refer to the one who had made the paintings? I stood up and made my way slowly to the back. I kept looking at the floor until I saw the edges of the hunger. In the dim light, I could make out the shadow of the pedestal, and on it, I saw the shadow of a figure. It looked humanoid, like someone crouched over. I couldn't tell which direction it was facing. I was so cold. I stepped back, slowly, the way I came. At last, after what felt like billions of years, I sat down on my chair. I spent the remaining time of my shift there, too disturbed to listen to music. At some point, I heard the faint sound of wet footsteps coming from the back. You know when you're little, and you begin recognizing the walk of your family members as they're coming up the stairs? How you can distinguish between your younger brother's upbeat walk and your father's slow, heavy steps. These footsteps sounded as if those two patterns were combined. Almost like limping, they went on for a few seconds, then faded without reaching a certain destination. I swore to myself that I would quit the next day. However, when I saw the bank transfer that night, I thought it wasn't really a bad job. It's not like I was being chased around or hurt in any way. I just had to sit down. I dreamt, however, of those footsteps reaching me at last. It's Tuesday, and as I'm writing this, I can hear them faintly in the back. I just hope that they appreciate my discretion. I wonder if the hunger and the shoes that walked home are connected in some way, but they don't pay me be curious. Story 2. The farm Chester gave me. I don't post often, but I need someone to tell me I'm not losing my mind. I'm Gregory, 38, divorced, broke, and exhausted. After my last job laid me off, I decided I needed out of the city before it swallowed me whole. I thought some quiet country air might reset me. That's when Chester came back into my life. Chester was a family friend, gruff old man, the kind who seemed born old, suspenders over a faded gray shirt, pants that were always stained with some kind of slick black oil. It never came off. My mother never explained what he did for work, just said he fixed things. I ran into him in a bar in Rochester, the kind of bar where your shoes stick just enough to the floor to remind you not to sit down too fast. He was drinking whiskey alone. "You look like hell," he said without even turning. I told him I was out of work, maybe looking for something different. He grinned, showing teeth that looked too sharp for a man his age. "There's a farm upstate. Place needs tending. Belonged to a friend of mine. Land don't like being empty too long. You take it on, you'll be set." He slid a ring of heavy, iron keys across the table. I don't remember agreeing. I just remember walking out with the keys in my pocket. The farm was wrong. Miles of corn that shouldn't have been that tall in spring. A house sagging on itself but solid underfoot, like it wanted me inside. The air was thick with the smell of soil, copper, and something oily that clung to my skin. The first week, I tried to treat it like a normal farm job. Cleaning the barn, checking the fields, fixing fences. But I noticed things. The barn doors never stayed shut. The animals in the fields weren't animals, just shapes that melted back into the corn if I got close. At night, I heard scratching on the floorboards, sometimes whispers through the walls. I kept telling myself it was rats, the wind, my imagination. Then one night, the corn called my name. Not rustling, not the wind. Dozens of voices, all saying Gregory. I called Chester the next morning. He answered on the first ring. "You're settling in," he said. "Not a question. What the hell is going on here?" I asked. "Place don't grow food," he said. "Grows other things. Always has. Needs someone to keep it fed. That's you now." I tried to laugh, but he wasn't joking. Last night, I woke up to find footprints on the porch. Oily, too large for me. They led from the corn to my door. When I checked the lock, the keyhole was slick with black residue, like something had tried to come in. I don't know what Chester fed this place before. I don't know why he gave it to me. But I can hear the corn even now, whispering, waiting, and the longer I stay, the louder it gets. Story 3. My cousin found some photos. I grew up in the late 90s, back when everyone's parents had shoeboxes full of Polaroids and those disposable Kodak cameras. My cousin Josh and I used to sneak into my grandma's attic every summer. It always smelled like dust and old wood. One year, 1997, I think, Josh found a shoebox tucked behind some Christmas ornaments. Inside were about 24 Polaroids. At first, they just looked like normal family pictures. Birthday parties, camping trips, kids in the backyard. But the more we looked, the weirder they got. In almost every picture, a man was standing in the background. Not close, always just far enough away that his face wasn't clear. Tall, thin, dark clothes, sometimes at the edge of the woods, sometimes behind a crowd. We asked Grandma who he was. She went pale and told us to put the box back. Said we weren't supposed to have it. That night, Josh swore he saw someone standing at the tree line by the house. I don't have the shoebox anymore. Grandma burned it the next day, but before she did, Josh managed to keep a few of the photos. I scanned them years later, and every time I look at them, I swear the man is closer than before. After Grandma burned the shoebox, things in the house felt different. She wouldn't let us in the attic anymore, and whenever we mentioned the pictures, she'd snap at us. I'd never seen her so scared. One night, when Josh had already gone to bed, I heard Grandma whispering in the kitchen. She was talking to my mom, and I only caught bits and pieces from the top of the stairs. "He's back again." I told him to stop after 68. The pictures always bring him. I leaned too far to try to listen and made the step creak. The kitchen went silent. A few seconds later, Grandma stepped out into the hallway, staring right at me. She didn't yell, didn't even move for a moment, just stared, like she wasn't sure if I was really there. The next day, I asked her who the man was. She finally told me. Back in the 1960s, before my mom was born, my grandparents lived on a farm just outside town. Grandma said a man used to come around, tall, dressed in black, always standing at the tree line. He never came close, never said a word, just watched. They called the police more than once, but no one could ever find him. The weird thing was, he always showed up in their family photos. Birthdays, barbecues, church picnics, he was there. And then one day in 68, Grandpa disappeared. His truck was still in the driveway. His shoes were by the door. He was just gone. Grandma said after that, the man stopped showing up for almost 30 years, until we found the shoebox. That's why she burned the pictures. She thought keeping them gave him away back. But here's the part that keeps me up at night. Josh still has a few photos hidden away. And last month, when I visited him, he swore he saw someone standing at the edge of the woods again. Story 4. The one from the reel. Some time ago, I was between a rock and a hard place. I'd lost my job after our suppliers went through a major price hike. So a lot of folks on the ground floor were cut. Strange how those cutbacks never seemed to affect those on the higher floors. I was looking for something new on short notice. I had medical bills to pay, a bad shoulder, and I wasn't too stingy where the money came from. I did some less than legal repair work for people I used to work with, and I tried to make my savings last a little longer with high-risk investments. But I needed a cash infusion, and I needed it fast. Browsing bulletin boards, online and otherwise, I stumbled on a guy who needed help. He needed an extra set of hands to go through some film. It wasn't very specific, so I figured he wanted to convert some VHS tapes to digital or something. The ad said no previous experience required, and it would take days, maybe weeks. Seemed easy enough, and he was offering a significant paycheck. I met the guy at a gas station just outside of town. He was hard to miss. He was close to 6 feet 8 inches and had this olive oil slick kind of dark hair, built like a goddamn tank. Even sitting down, you could tell this guy was a monster. He walked up to me and I offered him a handshake. He didn't seem to know how to react. It took him a couple of seconds to shake it. When he finally spoke, he had the voice of a chain smoker, like he was always on the edge of a cough. "You here to help with the film?" he asked. "Seems like easy money to me." I said, "Where we headed? It's not far. You drive." He got in my car, but didn't use the seatbelt. I buckled up and nodded for him to do the same. It took a couple of seconds, but he figured it out. "You got a name there?" I asked. "Don't much like calling you big fella." "Herman." "Herman it is." I introduced myself in kind. He brushed off a bug crawling up his arm, and we were on our way. Not a great first impression, but I can't say it wasn't memorable. He was right about it not being that far. 2 turns down a bumpy dirt road, then parked next to a closed chain-link fence. We had to walk from there. It took about 10 minutes. We ended up near an old office building in what looked like a run-down scrapyard. The thing was mostly empty, probably abandoned for years, but there was still power running. I'd lived in the area for a few years now and never even considered that this might have been here. It was the kind of place only a local kid running through the woods might keep track of. Herman opened the door for me and showed me inside. It wasn't too bad. It looked like he'd been living out there for a while, using a portable kitchen stove to heat up little strips of squirrel meat and beans. Even so, it wasn't as disgusting as one might imagine. He couldn't have been there for long. Before we went any further, I turned to him. I gotta say, Herman, this ain't the kind of environment I thought we'd be working with. It is... This whole setup doesn't exactly scream wealthy film enthusiast. So I'm guessing there's something you're not telling me. He gave me a long, tired look. I could tell he wasn't getting much sleep. So what's the deal here? Meth? Weed? Or, moonshine? What are you up to? He needs to be away from people. He? Who's he? Herman hesitated, then nodded at me to follow. On the far side of the building, there was a makeshift bedroom. 2 mattresses propped up with wooden pallets. There was a man lying there, surrounded by sponges, water bowls, and bottles of baby food. A lot of applesauce. Herman stopped me from getting too close. He needs help, Herman said, so we're helping. The guy didn't even look that old. 40 tops, brown hair, gray eyes, a boxy-looking nose, and a freshly shaved face. He wasn't sleeping, and he wasn't paying them any attention, just staring at the ceiling. I take care of him, Herman continued, and I need more help. You want me to change diapers? That's going to cost extra. That's not what I signed up for. You find the film. I take care of Emmett. Emmett, huh? Nice name. Herman nodded at that. Still not a crack of a smile or a hint of sarcasm. He simply agreed. Yes, nice name. The final room of the building must have been a rec room at one point. It had been cleared out to make room for a couple of chairs, a movie projector, and a white screen. The rest of the far wall was just boxes. We're talking stacked floor to ceiling, box after box after box. All of them marked with various movie studio labels, some of which are still around, but the logos looked different. The whole place had this old chemical smell like oil, plastic, and starch. Herman explained the setup. He'd gotten hold of a bunch of film reels, mostly 35 millimeters, from the 70s. He wasn't looking to convert it or edit it in any way. He needed help to browse through it and find one particular film. When I asked what it was about, he was less than helpful. It's uncomfortable, he said. You'll know it when you see it. Are we talking something illegal? Something I shouldn't see? Illegal, no, he clarified, but something you shouldn't see. Apparently, he hadn't seen it himself, so there was no way to describe it, but he knew there was a copy somewhere in these boxes, and that I would know what it was when I saw it. There was no need to check out an entire reel. I would know if it was the right one. It took some time to get the projector up and running. There was power, sure, but you got to tread the film in a particular way in order. I checked out a couple of sites online and managed to figure out. It didn't take long before I was rolling through reel after reel, checking a couple of minutes at a time before I switched to the next. Herman hadn't asked for it, but I made a couple of notes for each reel just to make sure I cataloged what was what. That way there wouldn't be any questions about how much work I'd done. Most of it was some kind of B footage. Scrap scenes from movies that were unknown or never shown. A couple of dialogue scenes from what looked like a thriller. A couple of interviews, environmental footage. Footage from various sports, even a couple of home videos. I'm pretty sure I saw Ronald Reagan in one of them. By the end of the first day, I checked out maybe 1.5 hour footage in total. Maybe 2. Most of the time went to switching the reels. Judging by the number of boxes there was and the amount of film each reel had, I figure Herman had gotten his hands on at least 1,500 miles of film. No idea how he did it, but he did. At the end of the day, I was handed my first payment in cash. He didn't ask me to come back at a particular time. He just asked me to get it done. I still wasn't sure what exactly I was looking for, but it was easy money. I went home that day with a stuffed pocket, leaving a list of notes for Herman to review. He didn't though. He spent most of his time taking care of the man in the bed. Coming home that night, I couldn't help but to wonder what I was getting into. I wasn't kidding myself. There was something less than legal going on here. You don't move out into a half-abandoned shithole just for privacy. You do it because you got something or someone to hide. But for now, they were paying the bills. But it was clear that I had to keep my eyes open. I figured it might be a good idea to bring something to protect myself. I didn't have a gun, but I had this flip knife from my home repair days. The thing didn't look like a knife, but it could cause some serious damage. If I were to face a monster like Herman someday, I'd rather not do it empty-handed. I went back for a couple of days, following the same routine. Check a reel, make a note, skip ahead a bit, check again, go to the next. Over and over and over. My right shoulder started to ache from the minutiae of unspooling and treading the film to the projector. It's actually a pretty good workout. Those rolls are heavier than they look. But it was also a reminder that I had bills to pay. Herman was out for most of the day running errands. He would come back looking like he'd been swimming, bringing something along every time. Sometimes food, sometimes supplies, sometimes money. One time he came back with a box of clothes for Emmett to try on. He really was a sort of caretaker for him, emptying his bedpan, washing him, changing his clothes. He'd roll him out of bed and put him in the wheelchair while he changed the bedding. They'd go for walks sometimes, neither saying or doing anything. All the while, the reels would keep rolling. I did find a strange reel at one point. I wasn't sure if it was the right one, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to check with Herman. It was this amateurish clip of a woman in a blue sundress. It was clearly some backstage thing. You could tell it was a film set. She was smiling at the camera, rehearsing some lines. Then, after a quick cut, she was outside. Her expression had changed, and she turned to the camera. It made me stop and check the settings. See, I thought those old 35mm reels didn't have any sound, but it turns out they do. Took me a little bit to figure out which button to press, but once I did, I could hear what she was saying. She was standing in the sun, holding a paper. Then she looked straight into the camera. "Put the film away," she said. "Please put it away and don't come back." A young voice through an old speaker. I played it back, hearing her 2 more times, but there was something about her eyes. Something changed with every playback. Like her stare was growing more intense. "Put the film away," it repeated. "Please put away and don't come back. Please." That last please, had she said it before? I wasn't sure. I turned the projector off, made a note, and got up to fetch Herman. By the time I reached the door, I heard something. A burst of static. "Please." I ended up showing it to Herman. As I did, I couldn't help but feel guilty. It was just a reel of film, but it felt like I was hurting someone, like I was on the cusp of committing some cardinal sin. Herman looked at the reel with great interest. The woman repeated her lines, swaying in the sun with her blue sundress. She made the same plea in the same tone, but something felt different, less earnest, perhaps. I tried watching Herman rather than the reel, but there was nothing to see. He was stone-faced, and he didn't much care for her emotional display. As the reel ended, he got out of the seat. Right actor, wrong film. He handed me today's payment in mixed, crumbled-up bills and asked me to return in the morning. As he wandered off, he told the man in the wheelchair something with a whisper, and for the first time, the man moved. Not much, just a tilt of the head as his eyes looked my way. And I don't know how I know, but he smiled. He couldn't, but I know he did. I felt it. That night, I didn't so much sleep as fall unconscious. Probably the deepest sleep I've ever had. I imagine myself on that movie set, in the hustle and bustle of the 70s. The jeans, the shirts, the hair. Someone playing Kiss in the cafeteria. There was an old house by the coast, angry men in white shirts, and fire. And that woman with the blue sundress. By the end of the night, I dreamt she approached me, putting both hands on my face, looking me in the eyes. Her fingers were so cold and thin, and as she opened her mouth to speak, the jaw kept extending, peeling off her face as a pale-blooded skull exposed itself to me. "Please." A voice bleeding through dying electronics. I woke up in a cold sweat. I covered my face with my hands, trying to warm up my aching cheeks. It took me a while to notice I had a new text message from Herman. He asked me to bring some spare clothes, whatever I could find. I had a box of my aunt's old stuff. She'd passed the other year, and I didn't have the heart to just throw it away. It wasn't much, but I figured I could put it to good use. I brought the box with me and figured I might as well get the day over with. There were dark clouds on the horizon as the sun struggled to pierce through the rain. It was going to be a pain in the ass to take that dirt road back home that night. Even on a good day, my tires would struggle to get all the way to the fence. So if it all turned into a muddy hell, it'd be a nightmare. Nightmare. All it took was a word for me to see that pleading face in the back of my mind. Not like a memory. More like you're hearing something from a great distance. Like when someone says your name in a crowd and you stop to listen. I made my way to the site and handed Herman the box. He put it away with an acknowledging nod. I got a good feeling about today. I said, I think we'll get it. He wasn't much for small talk. He agreed and returned to the better-than-man side. There wasn't much else to say, so I got to work. I found a couple more reels from what seemed like the same company. I recognized some set pieces and a couple of people. I didn't see the woman in the blue sundress, though. There were a couple of places that seemed familiar, but I couldn't tell from where. An old house by the coast, a deep cave, a fire. It felt like something I'd seen before. Then there she was. It was a shorter reel, simply marked Dawn. She wasn't wearing her blue sundress anymore. It must have been shot earlier. She just had a colorful shirt and a fancy pair of jeans. Hello, she cheered. I'm Dawn, or Miss Anderson if you're polite. I'm 5 feet 4 inches, 112 pounds, and I'm an absolute darling. I rolled my eyes a bit as she did a little twirl. It was some kind of casting reel, it seemed. As I leaned back in my seat, she relaxed her shoulders a bit. She dropped the actor's sigh, letting her face rest. You need me to do the monologue again? There was a noise from off-screen. There was a discussion. Meanwhile, the film kept rolling, centered on Dawn. She folded her hands, looking into the camera. She waved a little while she waited for the two men in the background to finish talking. Hey, you, she said. Hey, I said back. It wasn't a conscious decision. She just had the kind of face you want to say hello to. Didn't I see you the other day? She asked. Are you still there? I didn't respond. I just watched as her cheery demeanor faded. The background chatter was gone, leaving only her and the camera. She shook her head ever so carefully, and when she spoke, the camera barely picked it up. Please don't do this. The reel clicked, snapping me back to attention. It felt like waking up for a second time. My heart was beating out of my chest, making me gasp for air. I got out of my chair to walk it off, only to notice Herman standing by the door. Right person, wrong film. So it's something about this woman? That's what I'm looking for. Yes. Look, not that I'm complaining, but if you already know what you're looking for, what do you need me for? You don't seem to be in a hurry to get out of here. He didn't say anything. Instead, he dropped the box I'd brought. I took a few things. He placed a couple of extra bills in the box, almost doubling what I was owed for the day. The man didn't seem to have any sense of money's worth. And where the hell was he getting it from anyway? But I looked back at that white screen, and part of me wanted to play the reel again. Would it look different this time around? Would she say something else? But no, I kept going. As the rain kicked up, I decided to do a little overtime while it passed. I stayed a little longer and got to see Herman in the after hours. How he fed Emmett with applesauce, wiping at the corner of his mouth. They skipped the walk that night and settled for Herman, silently reading by his side. Some old leather-bound book. I looked through the boxes to see if I could find any other reels marked with Dawn or Anderson. Something relating to the woman in the sundress. It took me a while, but there was one more. It was marked with her name and the word talent in a rough Sharpie. I set the reel up, checked the sound, and clicked it. She was on a stage this time, panting for air. She'd done something, maybe a dance? She was swaying her arms rhythmically, like the music had just stopped. Very good, Dawn, said man off screen. Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Hampton. She looked back at the camera, just for a heartbeat. But it wasn't like she was looking at the camera. She was looking at me, like noticing someone you know in an audience. Would you care to describe to my co-writer here why? Exactly. You're interested in starring in the production? The man asked. I think The Queen of the Black Sands is a fascinating story, she said. I'd never heard it before, but once I read it, it was so intense. It's like the author knew me. Did it resonate with you? How? I want to be the queen, she smiled. What girl doesn't? I couldn't help but notice she had a bit of a Texan accent. It wasn't obvious, but it shone through when she got excited. I think she was putting on a bit of a show, but there really was an excitement there. Fair enough, said the man. I've seen all I need to see. You've got the part. You'll be the queen. She laughed, spun, and clapped. The men excused themselves, leaving her on stage for a bit. As the news sunk in, she was left holding her shoulders, looking cold. And the reel just kept going. Footsteps disappeared into background, leaving her alone under the spotlight. For a few minutes, it was just her and I. Then she looked at the camera. Excuse me, she said. It's a bit cold. You have something I can borrow? I waited for someone to respond, but no one did. She waved at the camera. Hello, she sing-sang. You there? Me? Yes, you, she said. I don't see anyone else around. You're not listening to me. You can't be. Sure, I am. All right, I said. If you're listening, let's hear you say, Clinton was president. I figure I was just talking to a recording, but she just made it look so natural. But this would be the one thing she couldn't possibly say. After all, it was filmed in the 70s. No Clinton for president back then. All right, you got me, she laughed. You got me there. The reel clicked and ended. I nodded and got up. I'd been sitting down for a long time, so I stretched my legs. I went to go see Herman when I felt something in the room. The hair on my arm stood up as a chill tickled the back of my head. There was a click as the reel started to roll again. Sorry, she said. If you can get me something for the cold, I'll say the thing. I turned back to the screen. There she was, closer to the camera now. As the frames flung by, I leaned down and picked up the first thing I could fetch from my aunt's box of clothes, a blue caftan. A bit quirky, but it was something. Like this? I asked. Sure, she said. I like the color. I approached the screen, clutching the fabric like a lifeline. The electricity in the air made my eyes water. I got closer, holding out the caftan like I was feeding a slice of meat to a tiger. It got so bright that I had to close my eyes, and even then her silhouette was burned into my retinas, casting a pale brown figure in the dark behind my eyes. Something lightened from my hand as a cold finger touched my hand. Thank you, said a calm voice from a struggling speaker. But I'm dying to know. I backed away, shielded my face, and looked up through my teary eyes. I saw the woman wrap herself in something blue, and despite the vague colors and struggling lights, I could see her smile. Who's this Clinton fellow? This time, the reel didn't just end. It snapped. The roll was cut in two, and the slides crumbled into machinery with a grating metal scrape. There was smoke, and I could see one of the lights on the side turning a light red. I pulled the plug and hurried to save the reel, but I could barely touch the thing without burning my fingers. Seconds later, Herman burst into the room. He hurried to the projector, pushing me aside. He did it casually, but it's like he didn't know his own strength. He nearly bowled me over. He checked the reel and the cover, pulling out what remained of the film and threw it on the floor. Keep going, he said as he cleared the reel. Find her. What for? I asked. What are you going to do? Not your business. It is my business, I argued. I've never seen anything like this. Ever. I want to know what the hell we're doing. No. Get back to work. I'm not going to dash. I headed for the door, but he blocked me. I pulled out my knife. I wasn't taking any chances. The problem with a guy like Herman is that you can't really do anything to get past their reach. He walked up to me, calm as can be, as I frantically stabbed at him. He took out this thick piece of metal wire from his pocket and wrapped it around his hand like boxing tape. The moment he was close enough for me to get a cut in, I lunged. But he stepped back, and the next moment, a sharp pain exploded off the side of my face. At some point, he'd picked up a film reel, and now he'd smacked me over the head with it. I was so surprised that I lost all momentum. In the next breath, he had one hand on my wrist and one on my throat. I was thrown to the floor with a force that whiplashed my neck. My world went black for a second as my breath escaped me. "We finish this tonight," he said. "You have to do it." "Why?" I wheezed. "Why the fuck am I even here?" "Because she's scared of me." He took my knife, folded it, and put it in his pocket. He took my phone, my wallet, all of it. And when he finally let go, he'd made it very clear that he wasn't going to let me leave the room until all was said and done. I checked for more reels with Dawn's name, but I couldn't find any. I went through 6 boxes, just reading the names on the side. Herman thought I was stalling and made me say them out loud. Test Reel 5, Cliffside Capture 6 to 8, Roadside Ambience, Narration, Scenic Capture, Diner Scene, Dialogue Cover, and then, at the very bottom, lodged in between 2 much larger reels, The End of Eternity. That stood out. I held it up and showed it to Herman. He went over to check the cover. "Put it on," he said. "Emmett wants to see this." "What if I don't?" "Then I kill you and get someone else." He tightened his fist, emphasizing the wire strung around his hand. He wasn't joking. "Fine. Then we're done. Then we're done." He turned and left the room, closing the door behind him. The rain intensified, clattering against the metal roof. What I thought was going to be a passing downfall had turned into a creeping storm. The trees were swaying outside, brushing against the side of the building like a cat trying to get in. Little taps against the window as the occasional raindrop flew off course. I had to try something. I didn't know what was going to happen, but whatever it was, I didn't want it to happen. There was this pit in my stomach that I couldn't explain. So I took one of the chairs, pushed it up against the door handle, and put the film on. Maybe I could get ahead of whatever was about to happen. I turned the projector back on. It was the very start of the reel. The film seemed different than the others, clearer. The black color wasn't just black. It was no color at all. There was an opening scene with Dawn walking along a cliff. She was wearing a blue kaftan, my aunt's blue kaftan. I ran up to the screen, feeling the electricity crackle in my ears. It was deafening, but I didn't care. "I don't know what this is, but he's coming," I said. "I don't know what they're going to do." She turned her attention to camera and blinked, as if she could hear the panic in my voice. She spoke with a slight delay. "Get out," the projector speaker said. "Run." "I can't. I'm stuck. This guy, he's Dash. A monster. I know." She looked to the side, then back at the camera. She was torn. Then she held out a hand. It drifted through the screen, reaching for me in a brilliant light. I took it. She wasn't cold at all. "This way," she said. "Let's go." Something thumped, and it wasn't my heart. Footsteps. I turned my head just in time to see a shadow looming over me, and in a heartbeat, I was knocked halfway across the room. I smacked my shoulder into the floor with a crack. I hadn't heard Herman break the door open. He'd pulled the wire between his hands like a garrote and wrapped it around Dawn's outstretched hand. He did it so smoothly, like he'd practiced his entire life for that one thing. I'd never seen anything like it. And before I could say no, he pulled her out of the screen. I'll never forget the sounds. Her screams screeching through the speakers of the projector as she begged him to stop. I saw her shimmering arm turning dull, solid, and real, and the moment her head passed through the screen, the speakers burned out and died, leaving her frantically scrambling to the floor like a wounded animal, her majestic movie persona torn from the light and brought into the dark as flesh and blood. Herman wrapped the wire around her neck and pulled her to her feet. As he did, I saw the man in the wheelchair by the door, except this time he was standing up, and he was clearly interested. I looked for a weapon. Something. Anything. I tried to pry the leg off a chair, but I couldn't get it loose. Instead, I saw the woman in my aunt's kaftan lock eyes with a strange man, and in a moment of recognition, something happened. I heard a no. From her, from the dying speaker, and from inside of my head. It reverberated through my body as Herman tightened the wire. It's hard to explain the sensation. I could see her on the screen, and again when I closed my eyes, and again when I opened them. It's like I was watching every scenario play out at once, and in each and every one of them, she was failing. I could feel myself pulling the leg of a chair loose, and at the same time, I couldn't. I attacked Herman, and at the same time, I didn't. He killed her and he didn't. She got loose, but also not. In one of those places, we made it back through the screen. There was laughter. Maybe a house in the suburbs. But it was just a flash of memories, like waking from a dream. One possibility of many, and it failed. Then I was back on the floor, scrambling to get my damn shoulder to turn the way I wanted it to. But with every picture, every sensation, the memory would superimpose into my eyes, turn my vision into a blur of movement, shade, and outline. And one thing remained through it all, that no. It was screamed 1,000 times in 1,000 ways, and it all came back to pierce through me as a cold knife, pushing closer and closer to my heart until it finally stopped. I was on the floor, gasping for air. The leg of the chair never came off. Dawn's hair turned to dust as a bare skull was all that remained. Emmett stared into her empty sockets, smiling, his eyes clear and exuberant, his arms outstretched in an embrace. Herman snapped the wire tighter, making the skull pop off and topple to the floor with a dry clatter. Nothing but ash and the blue captain remained. Emmett turned my way, almost gleefully. "I think you deserve a rest," he said. "You are very tired." I wasn't, but suddenly I was, and I slept. There were no dreams waiting for me that night. No warmth. No voices in the dark. No cliffside house. Just a long darkness, waiting for the morning. I was still on the floor when the sun broke through the clouds. A single ray of sunshine made its way through the windows, tickling my eyes. I sat up, my chest heavy. In the morning sun, it all looked so normal. Just boxes and projector. They'd cleaned up the dust and the captain. I stumbled my way out the door, my neck feeling like it was made of lead. Herman was in the adjoining room packing up all their things. It seemed they were leaving. Emmett was outside. I could see him through a grease-stained window. Herman looked at me but said nothing. As I passed him, he put a hand on my shoulder. "Wait!" He handed me back my cell phone, wallet, and even my knife. I looked up at him, considering whether to plunge it into his neck or not. I just didn't know anymore. "He wants to speak to you," he continued. Outside, Emmett was out in the morning light, doing a little dance. It looked like a waltz. He was in a fantastic mood, snapping his fingers and tapping his feet. His smile didn't fail him as he turned to me. "Morning," he said. "A splendid day, wouldn't you say?" I unfolded my knife and held up a hand, silently asking him to keep his distance. "Dawn," I said. "What did you do? You mean the actress?" He laughed, twirled a little, and then returned his focus to me. His eyes were so intense, I could almost see them pulsating. "She died almost 30 years ago. There are plenty of articles about it. There really is." He laughed, doing another twirl. "Now, about your payment," he continued. "I don't have any money for you, but let's see what we can do." He pondered for a moment, looking at my knife, then back up at me. "Maybe I should remind you of that lottery ticket in your wallet," he said. "You must have forgotten about it. I think it is quite the jackpot." "There's no lottery ticket in my wallet." "Are you sure?" I was sure, but now that he mentioned it, I wasn't. I'd bought a couple in the past. Maybe one stuck around. I'd been so sure there wasn't one. But now, I don't know. It was an alien feeling, like I was equally sure of two things at once, that I had one and that I hadn't. But looking in my wallet, there it was. But it was one of those scratch-offs, not a lottery one. "You should scratch it," he said. "You have a knife after all." "Or I could cut you," I said. "I could do that too." "You could try." But what was the point? She was gone. He'd gotten whatever he needed from that reel. I just stared blankly at my wallet for a second, trying to figure out if I really was this forgetful. Then Emmett pushed past me, as if he knew I wasn't going to cut him. He turned to me a final time. "It's going to be a wonderful day. Enjoy it while it lasts." The last thing I saw of them was Herman dropping the box to the ground, then tossing a film reel into it. Emmett came around with his hands in his pockets, and in the blink of an eye, the box was on fire. I hadn't seen it catch fire. It was more like something had shifted, like the air around the box was replaced with flame. It made my head hurt, and I could almost hear the reel of the film still going in my head. And if I listened hard enough, I could still hear that no. I walked away, I got in my car and I scratched my ticket. $825,000 super jackpot. I want to say that I called the police, or that I told everyone I knew about this. But honestly, I didn't. There was nothing I could say that anyone would believe. But that ticket was something real, something you could touch and use. It was enough to convince me that whatever I'd felt or seen was something I could try to forget. It's been some time since that night. I did look up the articles about Dawn Anderson, and it's true. She died in the 90s, not long after giving birth to her one and only son. Someone who the articles never referred to by name. Privacy reasons, I suppose. It was described as a freak accident, some kind of allergic reaction to a moth infestation in her home. I've since gotten back on my feet. This kind of money can get you pretty far. Not far enough to retire, but far enough to ease the worries off your shoulder for a while. I could start my own small business and get a decent place to live, pay my medical bills, and I'm just getting started. But things are going well so far. I've never told anyone about this in real life, and I don't think I ever will. Even now, I still feel this intense guilt, and I don't even know why. I don't think I'll ever truly understand, and I don't think I'm meant to. I think, at the end of the day, I was just meant to do a job and go on my merry way. Or perhaps I wasn't meant to be there at all. Maybe no one was. Story 5. Give me back my leg. I was returning from fishing. I had spent almost a whole day under typical Ukrainian early spring weather, when nature cannot decide whether to rain or to snow. But despite such a prolonged fishing trip, all I carried in my backpack were 3 lonely Christian carps. I had caught 4, but one was so small that I released it back into the river. Petro's house stood alone on the edge of the village, cut off from other streets by wide gardens and plantings. It was so far from people that it was hard to believe that it really belonged to the village and didn't exist in the middle of the forest. I approached the yard and carefully, slowly opened the gate, expecting Alma, Petro's old shepherd dog, to jump out. But to my surprise, complete silence reigned in the yard. Is she dead already? I thought to myself, and closed the gate behind me. I took a few steps across the yard and stopped. A torn dog chain lay near the doghouse. There was no sound, no livestock, no chickens, not even any insects. The only sound that reached my ears was the quiet howling of the night wind. Hey, neighbors. Guess I've arrived. Silence. I knocked on the door and listened. It seemed that someone was standing behind the door, breathing. Petro, is that you? The breathing stopped. A familiar voice came from inside. Who's there? It's me, Sashko. Who else? Sashko. Petro repeated in a calm voice. Yeah, like I'm so easy to fool. Listen, Sashko. Swear. What? I was confused. I said swear. Curse as bad as you can. Are you fucking crazy? Have you already drunk away your last brain cells? You stupid fuck. Who the hell do you think you are? Why would anyone come here, in the middle of fucking nowhere, and pretend to be your friend? I was ready to spit, turn around and go, when suddenly the door creaked and Petro whispered, "Come in. Quick, quick." I took a step forward, but the impatient Petro grabbed me by the jacket and forcibly pulled me inside. The whole house reeked of alcohol. Petro quickly locked the front door. Are you fucking mental? I spoke angrily. How long have you been on a bender? And where's your wife? Wife, said Petro. She left, took the children, and moved to her mother's. Ah! Suddenly the reason why Petro was drinking became somewhat clearer, and I went fishing. I thought, why not visit an old friend? But honestly, I probably had the worst catch of my life. Need a place to sleep? Petro asked. Even while drunk, he still quickly understood everything without any hints. Well, I mumbled, the next train won't be until morning, and I'd have to walk home for probably 2 hours, and it's already night outside. Sure, relax. Petro interrupted me and went deeper into the house. I wanted to follow him, when suddenly I felt sharp pain. I kicked something in the darkness. Fuck, where's the light? Only now did I notice that not a single light bulb was on in the house. Now, Petro muttered. Let me light some candles. What happened? Did the wind break the wires? Though I don't remember any strong winds. Petro ignored this and simply came out into the corridor with a candle. In its dim red light, I finally saw the face of the house owner, and I didn't much like what I saw. Petro resembled a homeless man who hadn't slept properly for a whole month, and the house itself wasn't much better. Windows covered with blankets and towels, things scattered on the floor, overturned chairs. It seemed his wife had left him long ago. I took off my shoes, removed my jacket, and meanwhile Petro went to the kitchen and came out with 2 bottles of vodka and a jar of pickled cucumbers. What are you doing? I said. We won't drink that much. Don't worry, Petro muttered in a tone as if he were talking to himself. The first one is hard. The rest will go easy. I'm so tired of drinking alone. Does he have delirium? I thought to myself. But I decided not to pressure Petro, and simply left my backpack in the corridor and went into the living room. As I walked in, I automatically flicked the light switch. The room was instantly flooded with bright white light. Turn it off quick, Petro panicked. His eyes went wild, and his skin turned white like a ghost's. I got scared and quickly flicked the switch again. Whatever, it's his house. Just walked in and acts like he owns the place. Petro continued to mutter, flicking the lights. Poor guy, he really needs help. Maybe he just needs to talk to someone. With these thoughts, I sat at the table and took a cucumber from the jar with my fingers. Well, Sashko, Petro's voice sounded surprisingly strong and loud. Let's drink for courage. Why for courage? I didn't understand. The vodka was strong, and I immediately reached for another cucumber. Petro, not wasting any time, began pouring second shots. I raised my hand in protest, but he didn't stop. It's all good, all good. Wait, I'll bring some meat now. But as soon as he stood up from his chair, he immediately sat back down. He's coming, Petro said with despair in his voice. Right, he's coming. He saw it. You shouldn't have flicked those lights. Who's coming? Petro was silent. He listened to the street. On the porch, he whispered quietly. Want to take a look? Petro shuddered. A drop of sweat ran down his forehead. Sit still. We heard footsteps on the porch behind the front door. Someone touched the door handle, tried to open it, and then stepped back. You could hear him walk along the house to the window, under which we were sitting. A window covered with a thick blanket. Give me back my leg. A deep voice echoed through the room. I shuddered from surprise and almost knocked the candle to the floor. Who is this? I whispered. Petro was silent. His eyes were fixed on the table. His lips moved but made no sound. Give me back my leg. The voice sounded again. This time it seemed to come from everywhere at once. I got up and began looking for some weapon. Sit still, I said. Petro ordered and began pouring more shots. He won't do anything. He has no right, understand? He's just trying to scare us. I understood nothing, but sat back in my chair anyway. The blanket on the window stirred. He's going to drop it, Petro warned. The blanket began to tremble like a wave, but it didn't fall. One of the nails continued to hold it, but now it no longer completely covered the window, and dim moonlight flooded the room. There was nothing outside the window, only darkness and the empty yard of Petro's house. Suddenly a triangular head on a thin neck appeared in it. I almost fell off my chair. The creature's eyes were round like soap bubbles, and with its 3-finger hand it touched the glass like a frog. What is that? I almost screamed. What do you think? Petro said irritably. An alien. What? An alien? Petro repeated with anger. Don't play dumb. Give me back my leg. This time the voice sounded as if from the ceiling. Petro shook his head. Bastard. He's pretending to be a dead man, he complained. He knows I've been afraid of him since childhood. Petro shook his whole body as if he'd just woken up, and then turned to me and said in a normal voice, Just sit calmly. Relax. Relax, I said. At first I was the same, sitting tense, Wouldn't let go of the rifle. He nodded toward an old hunting rifle by the wall. It became quiet and dark outside again. The alien disappeared. I took a shot of vodka from the table and carefully looked out the window. Just don't be afraid. Petro instructed. He won't come inside anyway. He doesn't have permission. I figured that out on the third day. Give it back. The voice shouted again. This time it was quieter and resembled an ordinary person. I don't have your fucking leg. Petro cried out. Leave me in peace. He turned to me, stubborn as a ram. Give it back, give it back. Did he lose his leg? The leg from his flying saucer. Someone unscrewed it, and he thinks it was me. Just because you parked in my garden doesn't mean I'm now responsible for your junk. Give me back my leg. The glass trembled. He speaks Ukrainian. I noticed. He's been mastering pronunciation for 2 weeks, said Petro, but he still can't swear. Too complex a concept for him. Let's have another one for courage. You better give it back. The voice threatened. Petro was visibly nervous. Now he'll start spinning. Petro warned vaguely. Just don't move. Sit still. It's just a vision. Even though Petro said this, he still clamped the vodka bottles between his knees. The house shook and tilted to one side. I panicked and fell to the floor. The house stood like that for a whole minute. But despite this, the table and chairs didn't budge from their places. Now he'll turn it upside down, Petro nervously predicted. And just as he said, with one sharp movement, the floor under our feet turned to ceiling. And again, no furniture in the room moved from its place. And despite the fact that it was now hanging in the air, none of it fell down. Give me back my leg. The voice sounded as if right in my ear. Just don't move, Petro shouted. He's not spinning the house. He's spinning something in our heads. Close your eyes, or you'll get hurt. How long will this last? I felt my lunch treacherously rising up my esophagus. Oh, this is just the beginning. He hasn't even started shaking yet. The alien put the house back in place, and then spun it around its axis again. Then again, and again. Somewhere during the third rotation, I lost consciousness. When I woke up, everything was already over. Only my fingers instinctively held onto the table leg. Petro sat at the table with long, suffering tears in his eyes. And you know what's the worst part? The bastard won't believe me, Petro complained. I tell him again and again, but he won't believe. He sniffled and put the vodka on the table. I looked out the window and again saw the triangular-headed alien there. It seemed to me that he noticed some hope in his bubble-like eyes. Are you sure you didn't take it? I mean, the leg? Petro sighed heavily. Why would I take it? Then explain it to him. Try it yourself, said Petro. I looked out the window. The alien was no longer there, but his quiet steps could be heard behind the front door. I got up and approached it. Listen, guy, you're mistaken. Petro didn't take your leg. It's not here. Give me back my leg, the voice behind the door replied. See, said Petro. He's not even listening to you. Maybe call the police? Police? Petro got angry. And where will I hide my fishing explosives? And the venison I hunted without a license? They'll only bring me more problems. Defeated, I sat back at the table. Even Alma ran away. Petro said with sadness in his voice. She tore a chain and ran away. Everyone abandoned me. I was left alone. Calm down. I tried to cheer him up. Don't despair. We'll think of something. It's an intelligent creature, after all. We can somehow come to an agreement. You better give it back. The intelligent creature shouted from behind the window. Drink quickly, said Petro. God knows what else he might pull off. And we drank and waited. The house didn't move. Silence also reigned in the yard. Maybe he left? I said hopefully. Petro slowly shook his head, and then we heard it. Water. A river. A river? In this locality? In the middle of the night? In the middle of snow? The rumbling of water was getting louder. There could be no mistake. A wild current was running straight in our direction. We saw it in the window. It broke the fence and flooded the yard. The water level was rising. Quickly, in a minute, half the window was already underwater. The glass will crack. I panicked. The hell it will, Petro replied irritably. There's no water there. All his damn tricks. He's already buried me underground, thrown me into space. My backpack floated past a window, and behind it swam 3 lonely crucian carps. Hey, that's my catch. How did he? That's why I hung up the windows, Petro said in a tired voice. Then he approached the window and tried to pull the blanket back, when suddenly from the other side of the glass the pale face of a dead person with a wide open mouth looked at him. I never figure out who screamed, Petro or the dead man. Petro took a step back, fell to the floor, and lost consciousness. And right at that moment, everything stopped. There was no dead man, no water, no backpack, no fish. Only night and the lonely moon in the sky. Petro sat at the table and stared blankly at the burning candle. I didn't know what to do, so I poured him another shot of vodka. Do you know who could have stolen his leg? I asked. For several seconds, Petro was silent. Anyone could have, he finally shouted. Some gypsies are constantly prowling around here. Once they stole my shovel right from the yard, and even the dog didn't wake up. Bastards, I agreed. And the worst part is that the thief with the leg is probably sleeping now. And we're suffering here because of him. I carefully looked out the window. The triangular-headed alien was looking straight at me, probably thinking about his next step. What's he doing there? Petro asked. Just standing in the yard. No, wait. He's laying firewood under the shed. Hey, does he want to burn it? You're lying, Petro shouted in fright, and instantly rushed to the window. The alien was carefully stacking firewood with his thin hands under the walls of the old shed, and then he looked straight at Petro. Will you give it back? He'll burn it. Petro panicked. He'll definitely burn it. He ran to the corner of the room and grabbed the rifle. Then he ran straight to the door. I barely managed to stop him. You said he wasn't doing anything. It's just a vision. And what if it's not? Petro shouted. I know where he got this firewood. The firewood is definitely real. We heard the crackling of fire. Very quickly the flame became so bright that we no longer needed a candle. There's explosives in there. Petro almost dropped the rifle on his feet. Did he really? He approached the window and put his hand on the glass. Oh, did it start a bit too quickly? And he didn't even pour kerosene on it. His thoughts were interrupted by a loud explosion. The roof of the shed flew off. Explosives, Petro muttered. Maybe I really should give it back. I was confused, digesting what I had just heard. What did you say? Maybe I really should. Did you really steal it? Petro was silent, clearly thinking about his next words. And then he spat and angrily shouted. It's his own damn fault. He shouldn't have parked in my garden. I'm walking home. I see his junk, doors open, nobody around. Well, I thought, the hell with it. I'm a trained auto mechanic. Can't I figure out how to work a saucer? So I took tools from the shed, propped it up with a piece of wood, and... Give me back my leg. The alien insisted. He will... I shouted. Why the hell are you giving away my stuff? Said Petro. Because it's his stuff. Now it was my turn to be angry. You either give it back, or you'll live in a mental institution. He'll never leave you alone. So let him. Damn it, just give it back already. I insisted. No, I've already suffered so much for it that I've earned it. I didn't even know what to answer to that. And what about me? What am I suffering for? I'm not responsible for you. You came here uninvited. Show me, I demanded. Show what? Petro was confused. The leg. Show me the leg. Petro fell silent. He carefully looked out the window, and then quietly went to the bedroom. In a few seconds, he returned with some kind of metal pipe about a meter long. Here, look but don't touch, Petro presented. This is it? And this is what he's scrambling your brains for? Why do you even need it? You don't understand, Petro replied offendedly. It extends. Look. He twisted one end of the pipe, pulled the other, and the leg doubled in length. He did it again, and it doubled one more time. And again, and again. It seems he stopped extending it only because the room dimensions no longer allowed it. It extends up to 12 meters, Petro explained proudly. And not only that, look how light it is. And it doesn't bend. Look, I'm holding it by the end with one hand. So what? I shouted. It extends? Who cares? Is it worth your sanity? Another week of these tortures, and they'll lock you in a room with soft walls. Petro folded the leg back and hid it from the alien sight. Listen, I pleaded. Just give him the leg. Wait, listen. Give him this thing, and I'll make you another one just like that at the factory. From aluminium. What do you say? Petro looked at his stick like a child at candy. It will bend. It will. I began to lose my composure. But nobody will spin your house again to bile. Petro didn't answer. He just sat on the floor, not taking his eyes off the stick. You'll die from alcohol poisoning faster than you'll have time to play with it. Petro's lips began to tremble. You promise? Promise what? Promise to make. From aluminium, just like that. I give you my word. Petro started to get up and then sat down again. Or I'll open the door right now. I threatened. Try explaining to him how you earned it. Petro looked at me with anger. Then he got up, approached the door, opened it, and threw the stick into the snow. Take it and choke on it. Petro closed the door and locked it. Then he slowly returned to the table and poured himself another shot of vodka. But I didn't see this. My eyes were fixed on the small triangular-headed alien, who slowly picked up his leg from the snow, carefully wiped it with his 3-finger hands, and walked past the untouched shed toward the gate. But before he left the yard, he looked at me with his large, bubble-like eyes one last time. The gate closed. Petro sat at the table and looked longingly at the bottle of vodka. Don't forget, you promised. You gave me your word. From aluminium, just like that, extendable up to 12 meters. Story 6. A man was trapped inside my basement wall. He said someone told him I wouldn't be home. It had only been 2 weeks since I moved into my new house. I never thought I'd have enough money for a cute little home with a garden like this. But luck was finally on my side, and lately I'd been earning well. The house wasn't big, 2 small rooms, a tiny kitchen, and an even smaller bathroom, which meant the washing machine had to go in the basement, where I set up a little laundry area. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The neighborhood was quiet too, with friendly neighbors. Most people around here had families. But even in that short time, I'd gotten along with everyone. I thought nothing could ruin this idyllic little life I had carved out for myself. That is, until the day I went down to the laundry room with a basket of dirty clothes. As I made my way down the stairs, something felt off. There was something hanging from the narrow wall between shelves, something I didn't register at first. When I turned on the light and stepped closer, I finally realized what it was. A hand. A human hand was sticking out of the wall, only up to just before the wrist. It dangled lifelessly. A man's hand. It looked as if someone had been sealed inside the wall. Cold sweat broke out all over me. What the hell was this? There was nothing there yesterday. Was this some kind of sick joke? Should I call the police? What was I supposed to do? I panicked silently until the hand suddenly moved, as if it sensed I was pacing back and forth. It waved at me, flailing, like someone drowning, begging to be pulled out. Without thinking, I grabbed it and started pulling. It didn't budge, like it really was part of the wall. The hand started twitching violently, signaling me to stop yanking. Are you okay? I asked, not even knowing if I was talking to the wall or the hand. The hand just kept waving, maybe trying to say no. What was I supposed to do? How could I help someone who was somehow trapped inside my wall? Then I had an idea. I ran back upstairs and grabbed a pen and a notepad. I pressed the pen into the hand, then held the paper out in front of it. Are you okay? How can I help you? I asked again, Louder this time, just in case the person inside could hear me. The hand started writing. Almost immediately. "Help," it wrote. I was pacing up and down in the basement. What the hell was I supposed to do? I called the fire department, hoping maybe they could help, but they hung up as soon as I told them there was a man's hand sticking out of my wall. I was an idiot. Maybe I should have made something up just to get them to come. Whatever. I'd handle this myself, just like I handled getting this house in the first place. I went back upstairs. I knew there had to be a hammer and chisel somewhere. The house wasn't fully furnished yet, and the kitchen still needed some renovation, so it was hard to find anything. But eventually, I found my tools. I rushed back down to the basement with them, and that's when I got the next surprise. The hand was sticking out more than before. I could now see all the way up to the man's bicep, and a little farther down the wall, just barely poking out were the tips of another hand's fingers. Two hands now, both coming out of the wall. I was shocked for a moment, but then quickly grabbed the tools and started chiseling around the first arm. The hands twisted in agony. They writhed like a worm cut in half. It was a horrifying sight. I immediately stopped and handed the paper to the hand again. "Are you okay? Did it hurt when I started breaking the wall? I just thought it might help you get out faster." The hand began writing again, slowly, shakily, the letters barely legible. "Yes, please don't. Let's just wait." I didn't know if I could trust him, but I agreed. Who was this man, and how did he end up inside my wall? Some kind of experiment? What the hell was going on? I brought down a chair for myself, sat there, waiting, staring at the wall, or more precisely at the man inside it. That's when I noticed something near the bottom of the wall. A few toes were sticking out. My wall looked like someone was trying to walk out of it, just very, very slowly. What the hell was happening here? I gave up on the idea of calling for help. No one would believe me anyway. I'd deal with this on my own, whatever it was. "What's your name? Who are you?" I asked, getting up from the chair. The hand started writing on the paper again. "My name's Jack. I don't know how I ended up here. I was just walking home from work." I eyed the hand suspiciously again. This was all too weird. How did Jack get here? And how was he even alive with most of his body trapped inside a wall? But there wasn't much I could do for him. Anything I tried just caused him unbearable pain, and I couldn't help him get out any faster. I was starving by then, and I had spent nearly the whole morning down there. So I ran out to grab food from a nearby diner. I rushed faster than I ever had in my life. I didn't want to miss what might happen next with Jack and the wall. All I could think was, please, let everything be the same when I get back. But when I returned, I got another horrifying surprise. His right arm was out all the way to the shoulder. The left arm hung only to the middle of the forearm. His left leg was sticking out up to the knee, like he'd taken a step forward, but it was crooked and jerky, like it had glitched halfway out of the wall. Only the foot of his right leg had emerged. My wall looked utterly grotesque, like something from a disturbing museum exhibit. I ate my lunch down in the basement. I didn't want to miss a single moment, but whenever I was there, Jack barely moved. His hands twitched from time to time. His legs shifted occasionally, but he didn't come any further out of the wall. "Jack, are you even human?" I asked after a long silence. Jack's hands began writing again. At least by now, he could hold the notepad himself. "Of course I'm human. I don't know what the hell happened. I just want to go home. God damn it." I felt a bit sorry for the guy. How the hell could he end up in a situation like this? Did someone do this to him? Or was it something else? Watching the wall was getting pretty dull. Time crawled by slowly. That's when my doorbell rang. Someone was at my door. I hurried upstairs, hoping somehow that it might be connected to Jack. Maybe someone had come with an explanation, but it was just my neighbor. He invited me to a backyard party for the weekend. He and his wife were hosting a little cookout with a kiddie pool, and they were inviting the other neighbors. As a new guy on the block, I was welcome too. The thought crossed my mind to mention Jack in the basement, but as soon as I was about to say something, I realized it was better to keep my mouth shut. Not exactly the best first impression to say, "Oh, by the way, I've got a half-naked man coming out of my basement wall." I'd sound like a lunatic, or a killer, or both. So I just accepted the invitation and said I'd bring something as a gift. As soon as the neighbor left, I rushed back downstairs. And thank God I hadn't said a word about Jack. His right arm was still only visible up to the shoulder, but the left was now out to the top of the elbow. His left leg was fully free, and the right had emerged up to mid-thigh. His hips were beginning to show through the wall, and yes, so was his penis. I was completely shocked. A naked man was crawling out of my basement wall. What the actual fuck was going on? No matter how hard I tried to stay in the basement all afternoon, there were things that eventually forced me to go upstairs. One of them was a bathroom break, but I tried to take care of everything all at once. After using the toilet, I quickly made myself some dinner, and of course, in my rush, I managed to cut my finger, so I had to deal with that too. But at least it gave me an idea. I brought water and dinner down with me, and embarrassing as it is, I also brought a bucket to, do my business in. I was worried Jack might come through while I wasn't there. I also brought down a pair of pants. They were the same old ones I used when painting the house. Now I figured Jack could wear them, since his lower half was already fully exposed, and staring at a naked man wasn't exactly comfortable. Once I had all that sorted, I followed through on my idea. I had brought the kitchen knife with me, the one I'd used to slice tomatoes for dinner. I wanted to check if Jack was really human. I grabbed his right hand and gently cut into it with the knife. That I didn't go deep if he was just a regular guy. I didn't want to seriously hurt him, but there was no blood. Not a drop came out of his skin. Jack, what the hell are you? I backed away from the body sticking out of my wall. Jack just flailed his arms. He scrawled something on the paper. I'm human. I haven't hurt anyone. I don't deserve this. I didn't know who or what to believe, but one thing was clear. The knife was staying with me, and I wasn't taking my eyes off him. Unfortunately, the bucket turned out to be a bad idea. By evening, I had to use it twice. Because of that, the basement started to stink pretty badly. It wasn't exactly pleasant to sit around in that kind of smell. I ran upstairs, emptied the bucket, and used the toilet again. I did it as fast as I could. But even so, when I came back down, I was shocked. Jack was almost completely out of the wall. Only his shoulders and everything above them, his neck and entire head, were still stuck inside. The old paint-stained pants I put on him had slipped off, because Jack was shorter and slimmer than me. So once again, he stood there completely naked, like some twisted mannequin. The sight always horrified me whenever I came downstairs. I quickly pulled the pants back up on him, at least to cover his lower half. And once again, the doubts began to gnaw at me. Jack looked like a completely normal man. True, I still hadn't seen his face, but his body looked like that of an average man in his 30s. Still, the suspicion lingered. Why didn't he bleed? How did he get into my wall? I decided I wouldn't go back upstairs for a while. I was going to stay there, really wait until Jack came out of the wall. The evening dragged on. It got harder and harder to stay awake. I didn't even want to move from my chair. I just stared at the headless body hanging from my wall, until sleep finally overtook me. I woke up at the start, like someone who'd overslept and missed their alarm. But what really shocked me, Jack was gone. There was no body hanging from the wall. And worse, the basement door was wide open. I climbed up from the basement cautiously. I held the knife in front of me, gripping it tightly. Whatever this was, if Jack tried to attack me, I would defend myself. But nothing like that happened. The hallway was empty. The bathroom seemed empty too. It was in the kitchen where the surprise awaited me. A bald man was standing by the window in my half-finished kitchen. He was looking out, his back turned to me. He was wearing the paint-stained pants. It was Jack. "I see you made it out, Jack," I said to him, still gripping the knife tightly, ready to strike. Jack didn't answer. He just kept staring out the window, looking into my backyard with his back to me. "If you need help, we can call someone. Or, I don't know," I continued, still trying to sound diplomatic. "They told me no one would be here," Jack said suddenly. His voice was calm, kind, and polite. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "I'm sorry," Jack said emotionlessly. "No one can know where I came from." Then, without warning, Jack turned around and grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter. I just stood there, stunned, because Jack had no face. His head was just a smooth, pale surface, no features, no mouth, no eyes, like a freshly painted wall. I barely managed to dodge when I snapped out of it. Jack charged at me again, but this time, I didn't just stand there. I swung my knife and slashed his arm. It cut in, but it was like he didn't even feel it. There was no blood, not a single drop. Still, Jack didn't hold back either. As my knife was lodged in his arm, he grabbed his own knife and stabbed me in the side. I let out a scream of pain, but this thing, it didn't stop. He ripped the knife out of my side and came at me again. I tried to defend myself. With mixed success, he slashed my face deep from my eye to just above my ear. When I lifted my arm to protect myself, he stabbed into that instead. I screamed again and pushed him away with all my strength. Jack pulled a knife out of my arm and then slashed me across the stomach, lengthwise. At that point, I was bleeding from almost everywhere. I realized I had to run. Somehow, Jack wasn't human. Shoving him, punching him, stabbing him, it didn't do anything. I tried to get out of the house, but the stabbing made it hard to move. I collapsed between the kitchen counter and the sink. Jack stood over me. That strange, faceless head stared right at me. His body was covered in blood, my blood. I thought it was over. This thing was going to kill me. Then I heard someone knocking at the door. "Neighbor, are you okay? What's all that yelling? Do you need help?" It was a man's voice, the neighbor who'd invited me to the garden party. I silently thanked whatever powers existed that he heard me screaming. But Jack didn't wait. He plunged the knife into me again. I tried to fight back, but the strength behind that blow was inhuman. He stabbed me in the gut. I screamed again, and that's when the neighbor broke down the door. Jack, like a thief caught in the act, ran. Just before I passed out, I saw him crash through the glass door to the backyard and sprint away into the night. Then everything went black. The doctor said I was incredibly lucky. If my neighbor had found me just a little later, or hadn't called the ambulance right away, I would have bled to death right there. I didn't tell the police anything. I said the attacker was wearing a mask, that I couldn't see who it was. It was better this way. They never would have believed me, that a faceless man who climbed out of my basement wall had stabbed me. I thought a lot about what Jack said while I was recovering. I had plenty of time. It took me over half a year to recover from my injuries. Who told Jack that no one would be in that house? And where did he even come from? I had a lot of questions. But one thing I was sure of, if Jack ever came back, or someone else ever came into our world through my wall, I wouldn't be so useless next time. I wouldn't be caught off guard again. Story 7. My son changed after his illness, and I'm terrified I'm the only one who sees it. I don't know if this is the right place to post this. I'm sorry for how long this will be, but I feel like if I don't write it all down, exactly as it happened, I'm going to shatter into a million pieces. My husband, Thomas, is a good man, a kind man, and he's trying to help, but his help feels like a cage. He looks at me with this deep, sorrowful pity in his eyes, and it's a look that says, "My poor wife is broken." He's scheduling appointments with doctors whose names I don't want to know. I can't talk to my mother or my sister, because the moment the words leave my mouth, I know what will happen. The concerned silence on the other end of the phone, the gentle suggestions, the hushed conversations with Thomas behind my back. How do you tell the people you love that you're afraid of your own child? How do you say, "I think my son isn't my son anymore," and not have them take him from you and put you somewhere soft and white? So I'm writing to you, strangers, because you're all I have left. Please, just read it. Before our life was real, it was messy and loud and exhausting and so deeply, achingly beautiful. Our son, Leo, had turned 6 in the spring. He was a force of nature, a small human hurricane. He was left-handed, a trait he got from my father, and his little fist would curl so tightly around his crayons that his knuckles would turn white. His homework papers were always a mess of graphite smudges, a testament to his effort. He was obsessed with dinosaurs, a walking encyclopedia of the Cretaceous period. He could pronounce Parasaurolophus with the crisp authority of a paleontologist, but still, without fail, called spaghetti paschetti. He was a terrible sleeper. He fought it every night as if it were a mortal enemy, and most mornings we'd wake up with him wedged between us, a warm, sharp-elbowed little furnace, his feet inevitably planted in Thomas's back. I used to complain about it. I'd stumble into the kitchen, bleary-eyed, and mutter about never getting a full night's sleep. God, why I would give to be woken up by one of his bony knees in my spine right now. His world was built on a foundation of intense, specific loves. He loved his stuffed bear, Barnaby, a threadbare creature with one remaining button eye, and formatted with years of tears, drool, and affection. He loved pancakes, but only if I let them get a little too brown around the edges, giving them a crunchy crust. He despised waffles with passion. He usually reserved for bedtime, claiming the little squares were tricky and stole the syrup. He loved the color orange, not bright orange, but the deep, burnt orange of autumn leaves. He loved the feel of my old silk scarf, which he'd rub against his cheek when he was tired. He loved the rumbling groan of the garbage truck on Tuesday mornings, a sound that would send him sprinting to the window. He was a universe of tiny, specific, wonderful details. He was ours. He was Leo. The fever started on a Wednesday. It began as nothing, a little cough at bedtime, a forehead that felt a degree too warm. I gave him some Motrin and tucked him in, thinking nothing of it. By midnight, he was screaming. Not a sick cry, but a scream of pure agony. His body was a furnace. The digital thermometer, when I could finally get to stay under his tongue, read 104.2. A fear unlike anything I have ever known, a cold, primal terror, seized me by the throat and squeezed. We've all had sick kids, the fevers, the stomach bugs. This was different. This felt like an invasion. For the next 72 hours, our world shrank to the four walls of his dinosaur-themed bedroom. The air grew thick and heavy with the smell of sickness, that metallic, cloyingly sweet scent of a body at war with itself. We lived in a blurry, sleep-deprived nightmare. We took turns holding cold compresses to his forehead, his neck, his wrists. We had frantic, whispered conversations with the on-call pediatrician, who kept saying, as long as he's hydrated, as long as he's responsive, just monitor him. But he wasn't really responsive. He was delirious, his eyes glassy and unfocused, muttering a stream of nonsense words and phrases that didn't connect. He didn't know who we were. He thrashed in his sleep, his small body rigid with tension, his limbs jerking. Thomas was my anchor in that storm. He was calm when I was sobbing, practical when I was falling apart. He charted every temperature, every dose of medicine, every sip of water Leo managed to get down. But I saw the terror behind his calm facade. I saw in the tremor of his hand as he measured out the Tylenol, in the way he'd just stand in the doorway for long stretches of the night, watching the shallow rise and fall of Leo's chest. He was helpless, and for a man like Thomas, a man who fixes things, helplessness is its own kind of hell. I held Leo's hand, so hot it felt like holding a live coal, and I prayed. I'm not a religious person, but in that dark, silent room, I prayed to every god I could think of, to the universe, to anything that might be listening. I begged, I bargained, I promised I would be a better mother, a better wife, a better person. I would never complain about being tired again, never be impatient when he asked, why, for the 100th time, never take a single precious, ordinary moment for granted. If he would just come back to us. On Saturday morning, I woke with a start, slumped in the uncomfortable armchair, my neck bent at a painful angle. The first thing I registered was the silence, the ragged, labored breathing that had been the soundtrack to our nightmare for 3 days was gone. In its place was a quiet, even rhythm, and the room was cold. The oppressive, suffocating heat that had radiated from the bed had vanished. I scrambled forward, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I pressed my palm to his forehead. It was cool, damp with sweat, but blessedly, miraculously cool. As my hand made contact, his eyelids fluttered open, The glassiness was gone. His eyes, the same deep, clear blue as his father's, were focused. They looked right at me. "Mommy?" His voice was a dry, cracked whisper, but it was his. It was his voice. A sob tore out of my chest, a raw, ugly, animal sound of pure, unadulterated relief. I collapsed onto the edge of the bed, wrapping my arms around his small, fragile frame, burying my face in his sweat-damp hair, inhaling the scent of my son. He was back. He was here. Thomas must have heard me, because he came running into the room, his face a pale, exhausted mask. When he saw Leo, awake, conscious, looking at us, his composure finally broke. He just crumpled. He fell to his knees by the bed, his broad shoulders shaking as he wept without a sound. The next day, Sunday, was the most beautiful day of my life. It felt like the world had been reborn in full color. The house itself seemed to exhale, to relax. Sunlight streamed to the windows, illuminating dancing dust motes like tiny, joyful sprites. Thomas made his famous "everything's okay" pancakes, and the warm, sweet smell of melting butter and maple syrup filled every room, chasing out the last ghost of sickness. Leo was weak, his movements slow, but he was smiling. He laughed, a real musical laugh, when our golden retriever, Buster, slathered his face with happy, wet licks. Every sound, every sight, felt like a sacred gift. I watched him sitting on the living room floor, slowly clicking his Legos together, his small brow furrowed in concentration, and I felt a profound, bone-deep gratitude that was almost painful in its intensity. The storm had passed. We had survived. I was so happy. I was so drunk on relief that I didn't see it. I didn't recognize the first sign for what it was. It happened on Monday morning, our first attempt at a return to routine. I put a plate of pancakes in front of him, the edges burnt just the way he liked them. Thomas, already dressed for work, ruffled his hair. "Think you're strong enough to tackle that stack, champ?" Leo smiled. It was a perfect, heart-melting smile that reached his eyes. He picked up his fork with his right hand. It was such a small thing, a tiny, insignificant detail. It was like a single, sharp pebble hitting a vast pane of glass, a barely perceptible sound, a hairline fracture that you could only see if you caught it in just the right light. I just stared at his hand. He speared a piece of pancake, dipped in the pool of syrup, and brought it to his mouth with a smooth, easy coordination. There was no awkwardness, no fumbling, none of the clumsy hesitation of a child using their non-dominant hand. It was natural, effortless, innate. "Honey," I said, forcing my voice to sound like casual, like I was making a playful observation. "You're using your other hand." Thomas glanced up from his phone, where he was scrolling through emails. So, maybe the fever rewired his brain. I read an article about that once. Something about neuroplasticity. Ambidexterity is a sign of genius, you know. He was trying to make a joke, to dismiss my concern before it could take root. "No, Thomas, you don't understand," I insisted, my eyes fixed on Leo. "He's never done this. Not for anything." I turned my focus back to our son. "Sweetheart, try with your special hand, your drawing hand." Leo stopped chewing. He looked at me, his head tilted slightly. And in that moment, I saw something I had never seen in him before. It wasn't the simple, open confusion of a child being corrected. It was a flicker of something else, something analytical. It was a brief, still pause of a performer who's been told they missed a cue, a researcher being presented with unexpected data. He looked down at the fork in his right hand, then at his empty left hand resting on the table, as if they were two unfamiliar tools he was evaluating for the first time. Then he looked back at me, his blue eyes clear and unerringly steady, and said, "But I've always done it this way, Mommy." A chill, cold and sharp and deeply unsettling, snaked its way down my spine. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't a child's fib or a moment of defiance. He said it with a flat, unwavering certainty of a person stating their own name. He genuinely believed it, a core fact of his existence, a detail as fundamental as his hand deadness, had been rewritten, and he was the only one who didn't know it. "Eleanor, stop," Thomas said gently, his hand covering mine on the table. I hadn't even realized my own was clenched into a tight, white-knuckled fist. You're exhausted. We both are. Let's not invent problems where there aren't any. He's alive. He's healthy. That is all that matters. He smiled at Leo, who smiled back, a perfect mirror of paternal affection. And in that moment, I felt a chasm open up at the breakfast table. Thomas and Leo on one side, smiling in the bright morning sun, and me on the other, suddenly alone in a cold, encroaching shadow. That was the beginning. And once you start looking for the cracks, you see them everywhere. Or maybe, and this is the thought that keeps me awake at night, maybe you start making them yourself. The changes were subtle at first, a slow accumulation of wrong details that, in isolation, could all be explained away. Leo had always been a whirlwind of noise. The house had been filled with a constant soundtrack of his chatter, his tuneless humming, the vroom vroom of his toy cars, the roar of his plastic dinosaurs. Now, the house was often quiet, eerily so. He would play for hours in his room, silently, meticulously. He'd line up his toy cars in perfect color-coordinated rows. He'd build Lego towers that were perfectly symmetrical, perfectly balanced. Feats of engineering that the old, chaotic Leo would never have had the patience for. Thomas saw it as a positive development. He's got a newfound focus, he'd say, beaming with pride. The fever must have matured him. I saw it as unnerving. The joyful, chaotic mess of his play had been replaced by a cold, sterile order. One afternoon, I found him in the living room, just standing in front of the bookshelf. He wasn't pulling books out or trying to climb it, as he might have done before. He was standing perfectly still, his head tilted, reading the spines of Thomas's dense physics and engineering textbooks. "What are you doing, sweetie?" I asked from the doorway. "Learning," he said, without turning around. His voice was flat, devoid of its usual childish lilt. "That's a bit advanced for you, don't you think?" I tried to keep my tone light, playful. He turned then and looked at me. His expression was serious, impassive. "You have to start somewhere," he said, with the weary patience of a professor addressing a particularly slow student. Then he blinked and the expression vanished, replaced by a perfect 6-year-old smile. "Can I have a snack?" When I told Thomas about it later that evening, he just laughed. He's a sponge. He's just repeating things he's heard me say. My brilliant boy. Thomas's pride was a shield, a thick, impenetrable wall against my growing fear. Every strange, cold thing Leo did, Thomas reframed as a sign of intelligence, of maturity, of recovery. He was so desperate for everything to be okay, so grateful to have his son back, that he couldn't let himself see that the boy who came back was not the one we had lost. The emotional disconnect was the hardest part. It was like a fundamental circuit in his personality had been snipped. Our old Leo was a creature of deep, sometimes overwhelming empathy. If I stubbed my toe and yelped, he'd have tears in his eyes. If a character was sad in a movie, he'd need to climb into my lap and be held. That part of him, that sweet, sensitive core, was just gone. Our goldfish, Bubbles, died. It was an ancient, sad-looking fish that Leo had won at a school fair. I found it floating at the top of the bowl one morning and braced myself for the inevitable meltdown. The old Leo would have been inconsolable. There would have been a tearful bathroom funeral, 1,000 questions about life and death and fishy heaven. I called Leo into the kitchen. He stood on his little stool and peered into the bowl, his expression unreadable. "Bubbles is gone, sweetheart," I said softly, rubbing his back. "I'm so sorry." Leo didn't look at me. He tapped the glass with his finger. "His homeostatic processes have failed," he stated. His voice as clinical as a lab report. The lack of sufficient oxygenation in the water led to widespread cellular death. "Can we dissect him to see his heart?" I physically recoiled. I snatched my hand back from his shoulder as if I'd been burned. It wasn't the morbid curiosity of a child. It was a detached, academic interest of a scientist examining a specimen. I felt sick. I flushed the fish down the toilet, my hand shaking, and told him we couldn't. He just shrugged. "Okay." No tears. No more questions. Just a quiet, unnerving acceptance. Thomas's explanation? He's processing it intellectually. It's a coping mechanism. L. He's protecting himself from the sadness. He's a smart kid. He was always a smart kid. That became the answer for everything. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I was constantly on edge, my nerves stretched taut, watching him, analyzing every word, every gesture. I became a detective in my own home, a spy in my own family. And he knew it. I am absolutely certain of it. He started to play a game with me, a quiet, cruel game of psychological warfare, where he was the only other player who knew the rules. It started with gaslighting. So subtle, I barely noticed it at first. Small things. I'd be certain I left my keys on the hook by the door, a habit of a lifetime. We'd spend 20 minutes turning the house upside down, only for Leo to find them in the fruit bowl. "Silly mommy," he'd say, his voice sweet as honey, and Thomas would give me a look, that worried, pitying look that was becoming more and more frequent. One evening, I was paying bills at the kitchen table, my head swimming with numbers and spreadsheets. "This doesn't add up," I muttered to myself, rubbing my temples. From a living room floor where he was building a perfectly symmetrical Lego castle, his quiet voice piped up, clear as a bell. "You carried the one incorrectly in the third column of the utility bill." I froze, my pen hovering over the paper. I checked my math. He was right. A simple, stupid addition error I'd overlooked 3 times. I stared at the back of his head, my blood running cold. He didn't even look up from his castle. He was isolating me from Thomas, and he was brilliant at it. He learned to perform. The moment he heard Thomas's car in the driveway, his entire demeanor would shift. He'd become a bright, bubbly, affectionate 6-year-old. He'd run to the door, throw his arms around his father's legs, and shower him with affection. He'd say, "I love you, Daddy," a dozen times an evening. He never said it to me anymore, not once since the fever. The moment Thomas was out of the room to take a shower or make a phone call, the performance would stop. The bright, loving smile would vanish, replaced by that flat, watchful neutrality. It was like a light switch being flipped off. The change was so abrupt, so complete, it made the hairs on my arm stand up. I tried to talk to Thomas about it. Again and again, I tried to explain the shift, the 2 versions of Leo. He'd listen, his face etched with concern, and then he'd say things like, "Honey, kids act differently with each parent. It's normal." Or, "Maybe he's still angry with you for all the medicine you had to give him. He'll get over it." Or, the one that hurt the most, "Eleanor, I think you're projecting your own anxiety onto him. You're looking for problems." I even tried calling my mother. I started to tell her, my voice trembling, "Mom, something's different about Leo since he was sick." But as I heard the words out loud, I heard how they sounded. I heard the inevitable follow-up questions, the concern that would quickly shift from Leo to me. I faltered, and ended up saying he was just being quiet and moody. "It's probably just post-viral fatigue, dear," she'd said, and I'd agreed and changed the subject, feeling more alone than ever. The final, decisive campaign against my sanity was waged over a simple glass of milk. We were at the dinner table. Thomas was telling a long animated story about a problem at his engineering firm. I was only half listening. I was watching Leo, who was pushing his peas around his plate with his fork. He caught my eye. He held my gaze, his own eyes unblinking and passive. And then, slowly, with a deliberate, almost graceful movement, he nudged his full glass of milk with his elbow until it tipped over the edge of the table and crashed onto the floor, shattering. "Leo!" I shouted, jumping to my feet as milk and shards of glass spread across the hardwood. Before Thomas could even react, Leo's face crumpled. He burst into the most theatrical, heart-wrenching sobs I had ever heard. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. "It wasn't my fault," he shrieked, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at me. Mommy was looking at me funny. She had a scary face. She scared me and I jumped. Thomas rushed to his side, scooping him up out of his chair, away from a mess. "Sure, it's okay, buddy, it was an accident. It's okay." He held Leo, murmuring soothing words, and over his son's shaking shoulders, he gave me a look of profound disappointment and fear. But the fear wasn't for Leo. It was for me. That night, after he had tucked Leo in and read him an extra story, the conversation I had been dreading finally happened. He closed our bedroom door and stood there, his arms crossed, his face a mask of sorrow. "Eleanor," he said, his voice heavy with a pain that broke my heart. "We can't go on like this. You're a bundle of nerves. You're jumping at shadows. You're yelling at him for spilling milk. He told me he's scared of you sometimes." "He's not scared of me, Thomas. He's playing you. He did it on purpose. Can't you see?" The words sounded shrill and unhinged, even in my own ears. I sounded like a madwoman. "Do you hear yourself? Do you honestly hear what you're saying? He's a 6-year-old child who almost died 3 weeks ago. I think you're suffering from post-traumatic stress. I think you need to talk to someone. I made an appointment for you with a therapist, Dr. Mercier. It's on Thursday." The trap snapped shut. He had won. The creature wearing my son's face had successfully and completely painted me as a monster. I was no longer a mother protecting her child. I was a patient in need of a cure. I went to the appointment. I sat in the plush leather chair across from a kind, bearded man with gentle, condescending eyes. I told him everything. The right hand, the goldfish, the math problem, the milk. I watched him nod and take notes on a yellow legal pad. I could see the diagnosis forming in his mind as clearly as if it were written on his forehead. Post-traumatic stress, maternal anxiety, delusional paranoia triggered by child's near-death experience, potential for postpartum-like psychosis. He explained that it was perfectly normal for mothers to develop these feelings, this hypervigilance, after a traumatic medical event. He prescribed me a low dose of an anxiolytic. I took the prescription. I had to play the part. I had to appear sane, compliant. It was the only way I could stay in the game. At home, the creature, sensing its total and complete victory, grew bolder. It began systematically erasing the real Leo, memory by memory. The first drawing he ever made for me, a chaotic, joyful squiggle of burnt orange crayon that I kept on the fridge for 5 years, disappeared. I found it torn into tiny, meticulous, confetti-like squares at the bottom of the recycling bin. When I asked him about it, his eyes were blank. "It was messy," he said. His beloved Barnaby, the one-eyed bear who had been his constant companion, was next. I found him stuffed headfirst in the kitchen trash can, buried under coffee grounds and eggshells. I pulled him out, my hands shaking with rage and grief. "I'm too old for that," he told Thomas later, who praised him for being such a big boy and growing up so fast. Each erased memory was a physical stab in my heart. I felt like I was the only person left in the world who remembered the real Leo. I would scroll through old photos and videos on my phone at night, the blue light of the screen illuminating my silent tears, just to prove to myself that the smudged, left-handed, chaotic, empathetic little boy had been real. I had to get proof. Something tangible. Something Thomas and Dr. Mercier couldn't explain away with a diagnosis. My last, desperate idea came on a Saturday afternoon. Thomas was out of Home Depot. The house was quiet. I sat down with Leo at his little art table in the corner of the living room. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel in my ears. "Let's draw, sweetie," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I laid out a fresh piece of paper and a box of colored pencils. "Why don't you draw our family? Draw you and Daddy and me." He looked at me with that unervingly calm gaze for a long moment, then picked up a black pencil in his right hand. Of course, he drew for nearly 15 minutes, in total, unnerving silence. His movements weren't the joyful, sweeping scribbles of a child. They were precise, controlled, the pencil held at a perfect angle, like an architect drafting a blueprint. Finally, he pushed the paper toward me across the table. "Done." I leaned forward, and all the air left my body in a painful rush. It wasn't a drawing of a family. It was a diagram, a schematic, 3 figures constructed from neat, sharp-angled geometric shapes, rectangles for bodies, circles for heads. They had no faces, no hands, no hair. They were just forms, one tall, one small, one in between. Below them, printed in perfect, clean, adult-looking block letters, were the names: Thomas, Leo, Eleanor. But that wasn't the part that made me want to scream. The figure labeled Eleanor was different from the others. It had been violently scribbled over. A furious, dense, chaotic web of black lines scratched her out, obliterating the neat shape beneath, as if trying to erase her from existence entirely. My voice was a whisper. What is this part? I asked, my finger hovering over the black chaos that was supposed to be me. He looked at the drawing, then back at me. He raised his small, steady finger and pointed directly at the furiously scribbled out figure. You, he said, his voice completely flat, devoid of any emotion, any childishness. You are the error. The sound of the garage door opening, the rumble echoing to the house, made me jump. Thomas was home. In a flash, in a movement too quick and fluid for a 6-year-old. Leo snatched the paper from the table, crumpled it into a tight, vicious ball, and tossed it perfectly into the wastebasket across the room just as Thomas walked in, whistling, holding a bag of mulch. What are my two favorite artists up to? He asked, smiling, oblivious. Drawing. Leo chirped, his voice instantly transforming, becoming bright and sweet and innocent. He held up a different piece of paper, one with a single, perfectly drawn, technically flawless flower on it. I sat there, frozen, the words echoing in the silent, screaming space in my mind. You are the error. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't trauma. This was a project, a cleansing, and I was a variable that needed to be eliminated. That night, I knew I couldn't stay. I lay in bed, rigid, feigning sleep, listening to Thomas's steady breathing beside me. I was a prisoner in my own home, with a husband who thought I was sick and a child who wanted me gone. My plan was half-formed, a frantic blueprint drawn by adrenaline and terror. I would wait until Thomas was deeply asleep. I would go downstairs, get the drawing from the trash can. That was my proof, my only proof. Then I would get Leo in the car and I would drive. I would drive to my sister's house 3 hours away. I would wake her up, I would show her the drawing, and I would make her believe me. Around 2 a.m., when the house was settled into its deepest silence, I slipped out of bed. My bare feet made no sound on the hardwood floor. I crept downstairs and, my hands shaking, retrieved the crumpled ball of paper from the wastebasket. I smoothed it out on the kitchen counter, in the dim light from the microwave clock. It was all there, the schematic figures, the names, the violent erasure of me, my proof, my sanity. I folded it carefully and put it in the pocket of my robe. Then I went to his room. The star projector was on, casting a gentle, dancing starfield on the ceiling and walls. He was asleep, his breathing even and quiet. For a heartbreaking second, in the soft, dim light, he just looked like my Leo, my beautiful, innocent boy. A wave of love, so fierce it was painful, washed over me. He was still in there. He had to be. This thing had stolen him. But he was still in there somewhere. I knelt by his bed and gently shook his shoulder. Leo, I whispered, baby, it's mommy. We have to go. We're going on a little trip. His eyes snapped open. They weren't sleepy or confused. They were wide, alert, and they glinted in the starlight like chips of blue ice. He looked right through me, and then he opened his mouth and he screamed. It was not a scream of fear or surprise. It was a calculated, piercing, ear-splitting shriek of pure, theatrical terror, a sound designed to wake the dead and summon armies. It was an alarm. Mommy, no. You're hurting me. Don't touch me. Daddy, help. The hallway light flashed on, blinding me. Thomas stood in the doorway, wild-eyed and frantic from being ripped from a deep sleep. His brain processed a scene in an instant. Me, kneeling by the bed, my hand on his son, sitting bolt upright, screaming, cowering away from me as if I were holding a knife. Eleanor, what the hell are you doing? He roared, his voice cracking with sleep and horror. Thomas, no, it's not what it looks like. He's lying. I scrambled to my feet, fumbling in my pocket for the drawing. I can prove it. Just look at this. But Thomas was already moving, crossing the room in 2 long strides, his face a mass of fury and terror. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Leo. He scooped the screaming child into his arms, holding him tight. The creature buried its face in his father's neck, its body racked with performative sobs. And over Thomas's shoulder, it lifted its head just enough to look at me. Its eyes were not crying. They were calm, cold, and utterly, devastatingly triumphant. The rest is a blur of noise and flashing lights and deep, numbing shock. Thomas on the phone, his voice shaking. My wife, she's having some kind of breakdown. I think she was trying to take him. I think she was trying to hurt our son. The police arriving, two of them, a man and a woman. The woman had kind, sad eyes. She asked me questions I couldn't answer, my mind a static-filled void. I kept trying to tell him about the drawing, but in the chaos of being let out of the room, it was gone. It must have fallen out of my pocket. I begged them to look for it, to go back into the room, but they just gave me that same pitying, gentle look that Thomas and Dr. Mercier did. The look you give a person who is no longer a part of your reality. My last memory of my home is standing on the front lawn in the cold, pre-dawn air, a coarse police blanket wrapped around my shoulders. Thomas stood on the porch, illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights, holding Leo's hand in a white-knuckle grip. Leo wasn't crying anymore. He just stood there, silent and still, watching him leave me to the car, his face a perfect, placid blank. So now I'm here, in this quiet place with soft walls and kind nurses who call me Han and tell me I'm safe. Dr. Mercier visits twice a week. He says I'm making excellent progress, that I'm starting to accept my diagnosis, a severe psychotic episode triggered by acute trauma and stress. It's a neat, tidy story. It makes sense to everyone. It explains everything. Thomas writes me letters filled with sad, distant love. He doesn't visit. Dr. Mercier says it's too soon, that it could be a trigger for me. He writes that Leo is doing so well. He's at the top of his class in reading and math. He's even started taking piano lessons, and he's a natural. He says the house is so calm now, so peaceful. He says he misses the woman I used to be. In his last letter, he included a photograph. It was taken at a school picnic last weekend. Thomas and Leo, smiling under a big oak tree, squinting in the bright sun. They look happy. Thomas looks relaxed, younger. The deep lines of stress around his eyes have softened. And Leo, he looks perfect. A perfect, happy, handsome little boy in a bright orange t-shirt, his old favorite color. I have stared at this photograph for days. It sits on my nightstand, a testament to the life I destroyed, the family I broke. It's the final piece of evidence in the case against my sanity. But if you look closely, if you look past the smiling faces and the bright sunshine, you can see it. The tiny, perfect, soul-destroying detail. The thing that keeps me awake at night in this quiet, safe room. The thing that proves I'm not crazy and ensures that I will never, ever be free. In the photograph, he's holding a half-eaten red apple. He's holding it in his left hand. He learned. The error has been corrected. The performance is now flawless. And I'm the only one in the world who knows. Story 8. The equipment rent to return. I've been doing equipment pickup and delivery for industrial rentals for about 3 years now. Construction sites, warehouses, film sets. Anywhere people need heavy machinery for short-term projects. Most of it is routine stuff. Delivering generators to job sites. Picking up scaffolding when projects wrap up. Moving concrete mixers between locations. The pickup request that changed everything seemed completely normal at first. Wednesday morning, I got the work order for a rural property about 40 minutes outside the city. Customer had rented 2 industrial with chippers for land clearing. Contract was up, needed them collected before the weekend to avoid overtime fees. I'd done dozens of these rural pickups before. People buy property, want to clear brush and fallen trees, rent the equipment for a week or 2. The wood chippers we rent out are serious machines, the kind that can handle 6-inch diameter branches, turn a whole tree into mulch in minutes. The address led me down a series of increasingly narrow county roads until I was driving on what was basically a dirt path through dense woods. The GPS kept insisting I was going the right way, but I was starting to wonder if I'd made a wrong turn somewhere. Finally, I came to a clear with a small farmhouse and several outbuildings. 2 of our wood chippers were sitting in the driveway, exactly where they should be. A man in his 50s came out of the house as I pulled up. Looked like a typical rural property owner. Work clothes, muddy boots, friendly enough demeanor. "You here for the chippers?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Just need you to sign the return forms, and I'll load them up." He signed the paperwork without really looking at it, which wasn't unusual. Most customers are just happy to get the equipment off their property and avoid extra rental fees. I fired up the hydraulic lift on my truck and started loading the first chipper. That's when I noticed the smell. Not unusual for chippers to smell like cut wood and sap, but this was different. Sweeter, more organic. "Looks like you got a lot of use out of these," I said, trying to make conversation while I worked. "Oh yes," he said. "Cleared a lot of brush." The second chipper was heavier than it should have been. When I tilted it onto the lift, something shifted inside the discharge chute with a wet, sliding sound. I stopped the hydraulic lift. "Sir, I think there might still be some material stuck in this one. We'll need to clean it out before I can take it back." His friendly demeanor changed instantly. "No need for that. Company can clean it at the shop. Actually, it's policy. If there's organic material left in the machine, it can cause problems during transport. Just takes a minute to clear the chute." I walked around to the discharge in the chipper and looked inside. What I saw made my blood freeze. Tangled in the cutting blades were long strands of what looked like hair, human hair, and caught on one of the internal deflectors was something that was definitely not wood or leaves. It was a piece of fabric, blue denim, with a dark stain that I really hoped was tree sap, but knew it wasn't. "Everything all right?" The man called from behind me. I straightened up, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Yeah, just a bit more debris than usual. I'll need to get some tools from the truck." I walked back to my truck as casually as I could manage, but instead of getting tools, I got my phone. No signal. Of course, there was no signal this far out in the woods. The man was watching me carefully now. Problem with the equipment? "No, sir. Just need to make a quick call to the shop about the cleaning procedure." "No self-service out here," he said. "Haven't had a working phone in years. That's why I like the peace and quiet." I realized I was in the middle of nowhere with someone who very obviously used our industrial wood chippers to dispose of something that definitely wasn't tree branches. And he knew that I'd seen what was in the machine. "You know," he said, stepping closer, "most pickup drivers just load the equipment and leave. Don't spend so much time inspecting the machinery. Company policy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Insurance liability and all that." He was close enough now that I could see his hands were stained with something dark under the fingernails. "Tell me, what exactly did you see in that chute?" This was the moment I had to make a choice. I could pretend I hadn't seen anything, load the chippers and drive away, maybe report it to police later, maybe try to forget about it. Or I could acknowledge what we both knew I discovered. "Hair," I said quietly, "and fabric, and I'm pretty sure that's not tree sap." He nodded slowly. "You seem like a decent guy. Family man." "Yes, sir." "Kids?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I've got kids too," he said. "Grandkids. They visit sometimes. Love playing in these woods." He gestured around at the trees. "Of course, they don't know about all the landscaping projects I've been working on out here." My hands were shaking now. The wood chippers suddenly looked less like rental equipment and more like evidence of something unspeakable. "Here's what's going to happen," he continued. "You're going to load those machines onto your truck. Just like always, you're going to drive back to the rental shop and tell them everything was normal. Standard pickup. Equipment returned in good condition. And if I don't..." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, like I said, I've got a lot of property out here. A lot of places where things can get recycled, and your truck's GPS shows you arrived here at 10:47 a.m. If you don't make it back to the shop, people will know exactly where to start looking. But they'll also know you were the last person to see me." "Will they?" "I never signed anything saying you actually made it here. Could be you had an accident on these back roads. Happens all the time. City drivers, unfamiliar with country roads, taking turns too fast." I looked at the wood chippers, then back at him. "How long have you been doing this?" "Doing what?" Clearing brush? Oh, years now. Started when I inherited this place from my uncle. Found out it's amazing how much organic waste you can process when you have the right equipment and enough privacy. The rental company keeps records. They'll know these machines came back to you. Of course they will. And the record will show that I returned them in good condition after a standard land clearing project. Nothing unusual about that. I spent the next 20 minutes loading those chippers onto my truck, all while he watched me work. Every time I looked inside the discharge chutes, I saw more evidence, more hair, more fabric, what looked like fragments of bone caught in the cutting mechanism. When I finished loading, he handed me a bottle of water. Long drive back, he said. Wouldn't want you getting dehydrated. I didn't drink it. The drive back to the city was the longest 40 minutes of my life. Every time I went around a curve, I expected to find a road blocked or to see him following me in some other vehicle. But the road stayed empty, and I made it back to the rental shop without incident. I unloaded the chippers and filled out the return paperwork, marking everything as equipment returned in standard condition. I told my supervisor the pickup went fine, customer signed off, no problems. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. That night, I drove to the police station and told them everything. They took my statement seriously, especially when I mentioned the physical evidence still stuck in the machinery. The investigation took 3 weeks. When they finally searched the property, they found remains from at least 7 people buried around the woods. The man, his name was Gerald, had been using our rental chippers to dispose of bodies for over 2 years. The police said I'd made the right choice by not confronting him directly. He had a rifle in the farmhouse and a history of violence that they discovered during the investigation. If I tried to be a hero, I probably would have ended up as victim number 8. Gerald killed himself before they could arrest him, left behind detailed journals about his victims, mostly homeless people and drifters who wouldn't be missed quickly. He'd been methodical about it, choosing people whose disappearances wouldn't trigger immediate searches. The rental company cooperated fully with the investigation, but the whole thing was a nightmare for their business. Having your equipment used as murder weapons tends to be bad for publicity. They implemented new policies, mandatory equipment inspections after every rental, background checks for customers, GPS tracking on all machinery. I still work for the same company, but I never do rural pickups anymore. I stick to construction sites and commercial jobs where there are always multiple people around. Places where if something seems wrong, I'm not alone in the middle of nowhere with no self-service. Sometimes customers complain about the new inspection requirements, about having to wait while we clean equipment before pickup. They don't understand why we're so thorough about checking every machine before it goes back into rotation. I don't explain it to them, but every time I see one of our wood chippers, I think about Gerald and his landscaping projects. I think about 7 families who finally got closure, and about how many other customers out there might be renting our equipment for purposes we never intended. The worst part is knowing that I almost just loaded those machines and drove away. If I hadn't looked inside that discharge chute, if I hadn't noticed the smell, those families might never have known what happened to their missing loved ones. And Gerald would still be out there, clearing his property one victim at a time. Story 9. I'll never look at clouds the same way again. Ding dong. Ladies and gentlemen, for your safety, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. We are approaching a bit of weather, and the plane will likely experience some turbulence. All passengers, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. We will turn off the fasten seatbelt sign once the captain has confirmed it is once again safe to roam about the cabin. We apologize for the inconvenience and thank you for your cooperation. Flight attendants, please return to your stations. On cue, the plane shuddered as it hit a patch of rough air. I shut my eyes and instinctively gripped the armrest of my seat. Flying 500 miles per hour in a big metal tube 30,000 feet in the air with strangers was nerve-wracking enough, and now the big metal tube is going to start shaking. My phone, my only real source of distraction, had died half an hour prior, and I left my charger in my check bag. I leaned back, exhaled slowly through my nose, and downed the rest of my $14 airplane cup of wine, hoping that it and the one before would kick in before the turbulence did. I never liked flying. Every time I find myself in the seat of an airplane, my lizard brain takes control of me. Any bump or slight tilt sends bursts of fear through my body. I tense up and convince myself that these will be my final moments, waiting in terror for the plane to plummet to ground, killing everyone on board in a fiery explosion. I found that a few drinks usually help to ease that tension. I watched as other passengers begrudgingly buckled their seatbelts. The old woman in the aisle seat next to me decided this was the best time to make a break for the bathroom, much to the dismay of the flight attendants. She managed to convince them to let her go by saying, "If you don't let me go now, the plane will shake it out of me in my seat." I regret to say that for my own sake, I was happy to see her go. I glanced out the window from the middle seat, over the man next to me watching when Harry met Sally, and saw that the plane was indeed approaching some thick white clouds. We were flying over a sea of endless forest and farmland, which made the clouds seem all the more intimidating. The PA system continued to chime every few minutes, indicating that the turbulence was only going to get worse. Ding dong. The plane began to rattle gently as it approached the clouds, like a school bus driving along an old gravel road. The baby in the seat in front of me continued to babble and chew on her fingers in her mother's lap. I smiled. She was cute in her little pink onesie, and it helped to know that if a baby can handle a little turbulence, then so can I. I straightened up in my chair and looked around for ways to distract myself. I tried reading Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan's lips for a while, but I kept catching myself stealing glosses at the clouds. Coasting alongside them gave me a true feel for their immense size. They dwarfed the 737-passenger plane, taking almost a full minute to fly past each one. I have to admit, despite my fear of flying, I always appreciated seeing clouds like those from their vantage point. They carried an intense feeling of beauty and awe that you just don't get when observing them from the ground. It looks and feels like you've entered another world entirely, one that exists out of sight, high in the sky, one that humans were never supposed to lay eyes upon. Ding dong. My pleasant daydreaming about clouds was cut short as we began to fly through one. It started gradually, blowing past hazy tufts that briefly blocked the view. As we progressed, the windows quickly became obscured by a dense off-white mist that swallowed the plane whole. In seconds, there was nothing visible past the wing. The cabin began to rattle more intensely, rocking from side to side. More than once, the plane jolted up and down, giving me that awful stomach-dropping feeling. The thick cloud taunted the plane, punishing us for disturbing its peace. I closed my eyes and dug my fingers into the leathery cushion of the seat. I hadn't realized until then how cold it was in the cabin. Had it always been that cold? I opened one eye and with a shaky hand reached up to twist the air nozzle. I twisted it one way, then the other, but felt no change in temperature. As I nervously fiddled with the air, the plane veered sharply without warning. Several passengers exclaimed in shock as the plane nearly went vertical. Luggage shoved up against the walls of the overhead bins. An industrial groan released as the plane swerved into what felt like a downward spiral. I sunk into my chair and tightened my grip on the armrests. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to be over. It wasn't before what felt like an entire minute that the plane eventually righted itself. The droning sound persisted. It maintained its tone but grew softer, like a distant train blaring its horn. It faded away as the plane exited the cloud, the apparent goal of the pilot's aggressive action. I kept my eyes shut and struggled to find my breath through the next announcement. Ding dong. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, for the safety of yourself and other passengers, we do ask that you remain seated while we get through this bit of weather here. Apologies in advance for any other evasive maneuvers. Shouldn't be too long before we hit clear skies once again. In the meantime, folks, just keep those seatbelts fastened and enjoy the view. Flight attendants, please be seated at your stations and fasten your seatbelts. Thank you. Evasive maneuvers? Anxious thoughts raced through my head as I caught my breath. Eventually, I did manage to settle down and open my eyes, catching the man next to me awkwardly shift his gaze away from me. I noticed the other passengers pointing and gawking out their windows. The baby's mother held her up to the window so she could see. Naturally, I joined in and looked out my rose window. It was unlike anything I had ever witnessed before. There were many, many more clouds. Different clouds. They were enormous. Over triple the size of the cloud we had just flown out of. They were far away from the plane, but their sheer size made them feel so close. It's honestly difficult to truly recall how massive they were. From my view in the middle seat, they appeared to stretch for miles ahead, as well as down underneath the plane and high into the sky. Beams of sunlight cut through thin cracks in the white walls, casting ominous shadows and creating deep, unexplorable caverns. In addition to their size, the clouds moved. I'd seen clouds move before, but never as these ones did. Their motion was slow yet intentional. Individual clouds followed individual paths. Up, down, sideways, systematically. Some rotated as they meandered through the sky, like massive gears with puffy cogs powering an immense airborne machine. Some appeared to alter their course toward the plane, as if to investigate their uninvited guest. I and the other passengers watched in admiration as we soared through what could only be described as heaven. Ding dong. I was so mesmerized by the cloudscape that I hardly noticed when the plane began to shake once again. It was the misty gray tufts that brought me back to reality. We were beginning to fly through another cloud. It looked like a thundercloud, though it never manifested like the first one did. Instead, small wisps of fog flew past the windows like a flock of ghostly gray birds. As we pressed through, the dark clouds made their presence known. It started small, with an occasional bounce or dip in the plane's course. It picked up quickly, as if many more clouds decided to join in. Strong jolts bombarded the wings and hull, sending loud thuds and bumps across the thin walls. Lights began to flicker as the plane struggled through the air. Waves of anxiety poured over me as I felt every cloud send ruptures through the cabin. I squeezed my eyes shut through the barrage. I heard passengers panic, letting out nervous cries. What the hell is going on out there? Oh my God, look at the wing. I caught brief glimpses out the window. The wing of the plane flailed up and down, threatening to snap at any second. The misty figures were beginning to take stronger shapes, becoming clearer as individual forms. They were picking up speed alongside the plane. We were being pursued. The baby began to cry as the plane shook violently. Her mother did her best to comfort her as the leaden clouds started to surround the hull. I heard passengers shout across the plane in frightened confusion. Holy shit, what are those? Daddy, I'm scared. Honey? Honey, look at me. Mike, stop. Stop it, you're scaring me. Mike, look at me. I could only listen in horror. My eyelids refused to open as the plane thrashed through the sky. Over several agonizing minutes, the terrified screams began to fade. Soon the only sound came from the baby. She wailed for her mother, who was no longer comforting her. Something was wrong. Ding dong. I forced my eyes open. The mother's body was rigid, her neck craned toward the window. Her breath was rapid but shallow, like she was having an asthma attack. Her husband next to her shared her affliction. I quickly turned to look at the man next to me. His face was nearly pressed against the window, his quick breath creating a small circle of condensation against the plastic. His eyes twitched in their sockets, unnaturally wide and sickeningly bloodshot, locked in a horrified stare out the window. I followed his gaze and caught my first glimpse outside since the dark clouds arrived. They had changed. Their gray appearance had deepened to an inky black, the darkest black I'd ever seen. They were mere feet from the plane, hundreds of vanna-black voids peppered against an ivory backdrop. Misty limbs like tentacles extended from their centers, hypnotically waving through the air. The moment I looked, my gaze was fixed. The ghostly tendrils crept toward the window, leaking through the narrow seams and into the plane. I could only scream as they reformed and reached toward my face, my neck straining against an invisible force. A wet squish filled my ears as they pushed my eyes deep into my skull, casting my vision into a dense black fog. I felt my body try to shut it out, to close my eyes, to look away. The fog began to materialize, hardening into a colossal black wall. Millions of specks of white light flew past my gaze before disappearing into the unseen horizon, a final farewell before I was plunged into complete nothingness. Time passed, Impossible for me now to remember how much. I don't remember how long it took for me to notice anything. Vague hums and shrill muted whines fill an otherwise empty expanse. A near imperceptible breeze served as the only indicator of movement as I stared into a black abyss. I convinced myself that I was dead and that this was the afterlife, an eternity flying through an endless dark chasm. I wanted to scream, to cry, to hear my own voice. I couldn't. I was reduced to a consciousness, separated from flesh, unable to move or speak. More time passed. Masses of color slowly emerged from the far reaches of the void, confronting the darkness with faint, dull light. Without eyes, I bore witness to everything, my soul at the center of the great display. The pulsating colors revealed a depth and dimension to my purgatory as they intensified. Vivid fusions of reds, yellows, and greens gently flashed like celestial bodies in a greater galaxy, extending infinitely in all directions. The world itself shifted its layers to pave my path through. Suddenly my movement ceased. I was left hovering before an immense canvas of meandering color. Thick, murky shadows leaked into existence from the empty, dark patches. They pinched off and bobbed through space, spinning and multiplying rapidly like cells under a microscope. Legions of dark anomalies presented themselves before me. In grand unison, they slowly collapsed into their own orbits, mitigating themselves into mere specks before exploding outward into enormous bright streaks of light. Gleaming tendrils slowly bore through space with angelic beauty. The unearthly noises intensified as they formed their paths. Lavish, nameless colors continued to pulse brightly behind them. Their influence refracted tenfold through the lustrous coils. They curled and twisted at unfathomable angles, methodically weaving warped patterns and impossible geometric figures, ones with inhuman intricacy and elegance. True, salient meaning conveyed in every movement, every intersection, every end of every line. A message carved into space itself. I saw it. I understood. In an instant, the images were ripped from my mind as the misty limbs retracted out of my eye sockets. I was hurled back into consciousness on the plane, my eyes on fire as a familiar drone filled the air. The black voids darted away, as if spooked by the returning sound of the train horn. It rang much louder than before, much closer. The other passengers slumped in their seats. Their bloodshot eyes remained wide and unblinking. I had little time to process. A jarring crash struck the plane from below. My head nearly bashed into the seat in front of me. Mechanical blasts permeated to the cabin walls, growing louder, becoming many train horns blaring in unison, like a choir of synthetic singers, all performing unique songs in conflicting tones. A cold wave of fear shot down my spine as the plane began to angle backwards. I was forced down into my seat as it accelerated. We were flying higher into the air. With splintering cracks, the windows began to shatter. Pressurized air poured out of the plane. My ears popped. Suitcases flew out of their overhead bins, crashing down onto the floor and unresponsive passengers. The powerful sound resonated from all angles, filling my head and vibrating through my bones. White fog began to pour through the windows, shrouding the cabin in thick plumes. I watched the slumped body of the man next to me disappear from view as he was consumed. The fog quickly enveloped me like a wet blanket, filling my mouth as I screamed. It entered my lungs. My breath cut short. My vision blurred. The otherworldly bellowing reached its resounding peak. The last thing I remember before I passed out was a final announcement from the PA system. The voice was not the pilot's nor the flight attendants. It was faint and monotone, though it pierced through the havoc. Millions of strained whispers vocalizing in unison. Long tones filled every empty space in my body. Every word burrowed deep into my mind. Ding dong. Humans, please do not be afraid. We above have agreed to grant your vessel passage through this realm and protection from its foul inhabitants. Please allow what you perceive as water vapor into your flesh and mind. You will be brought above. You will not be harmed. Your memories will require alteration to exhume the corruption incurred within your fragile minds. And ensure the safety and stability of your reality. We above command your involuntary cooperation. Please do not return to this realm again. The plane touched down on the tarmac with a jolt. I sprang awake, crying out and gasping loudly. My eyes darted around the cabin, but all I saw were annoyed and confused faces staring back at me. The plane was in typical condition. Carry-on bags stowed away, passengers healthy and in their seats. Nothing was out of place. I sat forward in my seat, struggling to find my breath. The harrowing events of flight, still at the front of my mind. I could hear the intense droning in the back of my skull. The powerful symbols flashed through my brain. A sudden hand on my shoulder made me jump. "Hey, buddy, you all right?" asked a man in the window seat. I turned quickly to look at him, startling him. I stared into his eyes. They looked entirely normal, albeit a little tired. He had dark bags under his eyelids, as though he hadn't slept well in a while. Why you wear those things, you're okay?" I stammered, still reeling. "Me? Yeah, I'm fine. Rough flight, but I must have fallen asleep at some point. Missed the back half of my movie." The man began to check his phone, and I managed to catch the time. 8:26 p.m., only 11 minutes later than our scheduled arrival time. The plane came to a stop at the gate. People immediately began to stand up out of their seats, hastily grabbing their bags and murmuring amongst themselves. No one was at all shaken or injured as they should have been. Dying dawn. "Alrighty, folks, the plane has come to a complete stop, and we'll be opening the doors to let you all out shortly. Once again, we apologize for that short delay, and thank you all for your cooperation. Please make sure you have all of your belongings before deplaning. On behalf of the entire crew, I'd like to thank you all for flying with us this evening, and we'll see you on your next trip." I was beginning to accept that I had experienced a terrible nightmare, one manifested by fear, turbulence, and a bit of airplane wine. I was beginning to stand when I heard a small voice. "Mommy, when is it our turn to leave?" "Very soon, sweetie, very soon." My face fell in shock. I turned sharply toward the window seat in front of me. Looking back at me was a little girl, aged about 3, sitting in her mother's lap, wearing a pink onesie. It looked to be several sizes too small. My eyes widened in shock. I was about to question her and her mother when a shrill scream erupted from the rear of the cabin. It was followed by a cluttered thud as something fell to the cabin floor. I was close enough to look behind and see before passengers began their panicked rush out of the plane. Lying outside the bathroom door was a decaying corpse of an old woman. Her stringy black hair fell into her slacked, open jaw. Her shriveled eyes were sunken unnaturally deep into her skull. It was the corpse of a woman who had long been trapped in that bathroom. Story 10. My best friend didn't survive her exorcism. Now the thing inside her is hollowing me out. Clara and I used to wait for it. She said the silence was a kind of sacrament, that if you listened long enough you could hear the earth itself bleeding. She wasn't wrong. The longer we sat, the more it seemed to thicken in the air, carrying with it the copper stink of blood. Sometimes we saw things moving along the tree line. Not animals, never animals. These were taller, wrong in their proportions, bending at the joints like marionettes with tangled strings. Their mouths hung slack, tongues black and swollen, and their teeth shone wet like broken glass. I remember once the silence deepened so suddenly I felt dizzy, and when I blinked I saw one of them closer. Close enough to see that its throat was slit wide open, and yet it kept trying to moan. Clara just smiled at it, lips stained red from where her gums had started bleeding. She called them the choir. Her body began to change in those weeks. She'd wake up with blood soaking through her shirt, not from her nose or her mouth, but from tiny, perfect holes along her ribs, as though something had bitten her over and over while she slept. She showed me one evening, lifting the fabric, and I swear the wounds pulsed faintly, weeping in rhythm, as if there were small mouths breathing under her skin. "You don't understand," she whispered to me once, eyes hollow, voice raw. "It's not hurting me. It's hollowing me out so I can hold it." I begged her to see a doctor. She laughed until blood dribbled from the corner of her mouth. On the last night before they locked me out of the house, we sat together by the road. The silence was so heavy it felt like a cathedral had collapsed over us. I could barely breathe, but Clara seemed stronger, straighter. Her humming was louder than it had ever been, and the figures along the trees leaned in as if they were listening. I tried not to look at them, but I couldn't stop. Their faces were nothing but gashes, open, leaking, gnawing at the air like starving things. Clara gripped my wrist, so tight her nails drew blood. Her eyes were black all the way through now, and when she smiled, her teeth had grown long and thin, like needles slick with meat. "Don't watch me die," she said, but it didn't sound like her. It sounded like something already inside her, promising it wasn't death she was headed toward, but something worse, something that would make death look merciful. That was the last time I saw her alive. They started at sundown. Her parents didn't want me there, but I couldn't leave. I stood by the window, forehead pressed against the cold glass, watching candlelight bend against the curtains. I could hear the priest's voice, low and trembling, climbing into chants. The first hour was only prayers, but even then the house began to moan, timbers straining, plaster cracking in thin lines down the wall like veins bursting open. Then Clara screamed. It wasn't her voice. It was a rupture, a splitting howl that rattled my jaw and filled my throat with the taste of blood. When it stopped, I realized I was bleeding from my gums. The curtains fluttered though the windows were shut tight. Shadows swam across the ceiling in shapes that didn't match anybody inside. Something heavy slammed against the wall so hard the glass beside me shook, and I saw her mother stumble back with a hand over her face, red pouring between her fingers. The priest kept shouting, but his voice was shaking apart. The words came out raw, breaking, like he was coughing shards of glass. And then Clara laughed, loud, wet, hysterical. It didn't stop even when it turned into choking. I saw her body thrash in the candlelight, her hair whipping as if pulled by invisible fists. She spat, and I swear the spray hit the far wall, dark and thick, a spray of red that painted a crucifix above the door. The smell turned unbearable, copper and bile and something sour, like rotting fruit. The priest staggered forward, pressing the cross to her chest, and that's when she began tearing at herself. I swear on my life, I saw her nails dig into her stomach, ripping skin in long, jagged strips. The blood ran too freely, more than a body should hold, puddling fast, soaking the floor. She laughed through it, shrieking in two voices, hers and something deeper, layered beneath like an echo in a cavern. The figures came back then. I saw them in the corners of the room, crowding close to her chair, long black shapes with slashed mouths and eyes like pits, their limbs twitching in time with her thrashing. Nobody else seemed to see them. They stood there like witnesses at a baptism, and then suddenly it ended. Her body went still, her head tilted back, eyes rolled white, and the laugh died in her throat like something cut it out mid-breath. The silence fell so thick it choked me. For a moment, I thought they had done it, that they had dragged whatever lived in her out into the dark. But then her chest opened, not split, not cut, open like something inside had been clawing for release, and finally burst through. The sound it made was wet, gurgling, obscene. Blood sprayed across the priest's vestments. He dropped the cross. Her mother fainted. Her father fell to his knees, sobbing, and in that ruin of her body, just for a second, I saw something look out. Not Clara, not human, a face made of torn flesh and teeth, smiling, drinking in the horror like wine. And then it was gone. They carried her out hours later in a black bag. No one met my eyes. No one said a word. Her mother called me the next morning. She didn't say Clara died. She said, in a voice scraped raw, that she did not survive the deliverance. But I know better. I think what I saw wasn't leaving her. It was being born. It hasn't left me alone. Since the night of the exorcism, I can't close my eyes without seeing her. Not Clara as I knew her, not the girl who used to hum hymns on the roadside. What I see now is her face split wide, black veins crawling out her skin like roots, her mouth a gash that never stops bleeding. She stands at the foot of my bed and hums, but the sound doesn't come from her throat anymore. It comes from somewhere deeper, like it's rattling through her ribs, a sound too big for a frame. I keep waking up with blood in my mouth. At first I thought I was biting my tongue in my sleep, but last night I spit into the sink and a tooth clinked against the porcelain. My gums are raw, torn open as if something's feeding there. The silence I told you about before, it's not just outside anymore. It's in me. I feel it sitting heavy in my chest, pumping with my blood. Sometimes it grows so loud I can't hear anything else. Just that deep, gory stillness pressing against my skull. I went back to her house tonight. I shouldn't have. Her parents are gone now, moved out, left everything behind. The windows are broken, the doors wide open. The whole place reeks like copper and rot. Her chair is still there, the one she was strapped into when she tore herself open. The wood is black with dried blood. The crucifix above the door is bent, twisted like it was wrenched by enormous hands. I swear I heard her humming the walls. Not faintly, not like a memory. Loud, wet, as if the house itself was vibrating with her voice. And then I saw them, the same figures that used to gather in the tree line, gaunt, blood-slick things with their jaws unhinged. They filled the living room, packed into the corners, pressed against the ceiling, crouched on all fours with their tongues dragging across the floorboards. Their eyes were wet holes, and every one of them was humming her tune. I ran, but the silence followed me home. It's in my house now. The figures crowd the edge of my vision when the lights go out. The walls groan. My bed vibrates like it's breathing. And when I finally fall asleep, I wake up drenched, my skin sticky with blood that isn't mine. I don't know how long I have. I don't think this is about Clara anymore. She wasn't the end of it. She was the beginning. The choir she talked about has taken root. And I think I'm next. My gums are still bleeding. My skin feels thinner every hour, like it's stretching to make room for something beneath. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I catch a face staring out through mine. Not Clara, not me. Something smiling, hungry, waiting for the silence to finish its work. If I stop posting, it's because it's done hollowing me out. And when that happens, I don't think I'll be alone anymore.